Hello, my dear dreamers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and wonder. Tonight, we journey far to the north, to a land of endless forests and 1,000 shimmering lakes. A place where winter comes early and stays long, where the northern lights dance across the sky like spirits at play, and where the old magic still whispers through the pine trees if you know how to listen. This is Finland, or as its people call it, Suomi, the land of marshes and midnight sun. And in this ancient land, there lived a young woman named Aino, who was about to discover that her voice carried more power than she ever imagined. So settle in, pull your blankets close, and let us begin. The village of Kalevala sat nestled between the great lake and the whispering forest like a child, cradled between two protective parents. It was a small place, perhaps 40 homes in all, each one built of sturdy pine logs chinked with moss and roofed with birch bark that had silvered with age. Smoke rose from every chimney in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of burning wood and cooking rye bread into the crisp autumn air. The people here were fishermen and farmers, woodcutters and weavers, folk who lived close to the earth and knew its rhythms as intimately as they knew their own heartbeats. On the eastern edge of the village, where the forest pressed closest and the oldest birch trees stood like white-barked sentinels, there was a cottage smaller than the others, but somehow more welcoming. Its walls were decorated with dried herbs hanging in fragrant bundles, and its single window glowed with warm light, even on the darkest evenings. This was the home of Lempi, the village runolaulaja, the singer of runes, and her granddaughter Aino. Aino woke that morning to the sound of her grandmother humming. It was a soft sound, gentle as snowfall, and it wove through her dreams until she could not tell where sleeping ended and waking began. She lay still for a moment beneath her pile of woolen blankets and the thick bearskin that kept the chill at bay, listening to that familiar melody. Grandmother Lempi had been humming and singing for as long as Aino could remember. It was simply what she did, as natural as breathing. The cottage was dim, lit only by the glow of embers in the great stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Dawn had not yet fully arrived. Outside, the sky was that particular shade of deep blue that comes in the moments before sunrise, and the first frost of the season had painted intricate patterns across the window glass. Aino could see her breath misting in the cold air, and she burrowed deeper into her covers, savoring the warmth. But there was work to be done. There was always work to be done. She pushed aside her blankets with a resigned sigh and swung her feet to the wooden floor, gasping at the cold that shot through her soles. Her wool stockings were draped over the chair by the fire, where she had left them to warm, and she hopped across the floor to retrieve them, her breath coming in small white puffs. "Good morning, little lark," her grandmother called from the other side of the cottage. Lempi was already dressed and busy at her workbench, grinding something in her old stone mortar with practiced movements. Her white hair was braided and coiled atop her head like a crown of snow, and despite her 70 winters, her blue eyes were bright and sharp as a winter sky. "You slept well, I hope?" "I dreamed of the northern lights," Aino said, pulling on her stockings and then her thick felt boots. They were singing. Lempi paused in her grinding and smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening with warmth. Did they now? And what song were they singing? Aino tried to remember, but the dream was already fading like mist in morning sunlight. I cannot recall the words, only that it was beautiful and very, very old. The oldest songs always are, her grandmother said, resuming her work. The pestle made a rhythmic scraping sound against the stone. They carry the memory of the world before words, when everything sang its own nature into being. The wind sang wind, the water sang water, the stones sang themselves solid and strong. Aino had heard variations of this lesson many times throughout her 20 winters of life. Her grandmother was the village runolaulaja, the keeper of ancient songs that held power over the world itself. It was a gift passed down through generations from mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter, stretching back to a time before memory. Through song, a skilled runolaulaja could heal the sick, call fish to the nets, bless the crops, and keep the dark spirits of the forest at bay. It was sacred work, vital work, and Grandmother Lempi had performed it faithfully for more than 50 years. Aino moved to the fireplace and knelt before it, taking up the poker to stir the embers back to life. She added kindling first, small twigs and strips of birch bark that caught quickly, then larger pieces of split pine that crackled and popped as the flames embraced them. The warmth spread through the cottage like a blessing, pushing back the cold that had crept in during the night. While Aino tended the fire, she watched her grandmother from the corner of her eye. Lempi had finished grinding her herbs and was now mixing them with honey in a small clay pot. Her movements were graceful despite her age, her hands steady and sure. But Aino had noticed something troubling in recent weeks. Lempi tired more easily than she used to. She took longer to rise from her chair. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would press her hand to her chest and breathe deeply, as if trying to catch a breath that had slipped away. "The porridge is nearly ready," Lempi said, nodding toward the iron pot hanging over the fire. "I added extra honey this morning, and there are lingonberries in the bowl by the window." Aino smiled. Her grandmother always knew how to make even the simplest meal feel like a feast. She found 2 wooden bowls and filled them with the thick rye porridge, then scattered handfuls of the tart red berries over the top. They ate sitting by the fire, the bowls warm in their hands, and for a time neither spoke. Words were not always necessary between them. They had lived together, just the 2 of them, since Aino was 7 years old, when the fever had taken her mother and father in the same cruel winter. Grandmother Lempi had raised her, taught her, loved her, and in the quiet comfort of their shared silences, Aino felt that love as surely as she felt the warmth of the fire. After breakfast, Lempi rose and moved to the corner of the cottage where her most precious possession waited. It was a kantele, a traditional Finnish string instrument carved from a single piece of birchwood that had been blessed by lightning. The body was smooth and pale, decorated with ancient symbols that Aino had never been able to fully decipher. and the strings, made from the hair of a mare who had lived to see 30 summers, still held their tune despite their age. Lempi lifted the kantele with the reverence one might show a holy relic, and carried it to her chair by the window. "Come, little lark," she said, patting the stool beside her. "Sit with me a while. The morning is quiet, and there is something I wish to teach you." Aino obeyed, settling onto the low stool and tucking her skirts around her legs. She watched as her grandmother's fingers found their places on the strings, and then Lempi began to play. The sound that emerged was unlike anything else in the world. It was not merely music. It was the voice of the forest and the lake and the sky all woven together, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This is the kantele of our family," Lempi said softly, her fingers still moving. "It was carved by your great-great-grandmother from a tree that grew at the center of a sacred grove. She played it for the spirits of the land, and they blessed it with their power. Since then, it has passed from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter, and each of us has added our own songs to its memory." "I know, grandmother," Aino said. "You have told me this story before." Lempi smiled, but there was something in her eyes that Aino could not quite read. "Yes, I have. But today I wish to tell you something more." She paused her playing and turned to face Aino fully. Her blue eyes were serious, searching. "You have the gift, little lark. I have known it since you were a child. Since the first time I heard you humming in your sleep and the fire grew brighter in response. The blood of the runolaulaja runs in your veins as surely as it runs in mine." Aino felt her heart skip. She had suspected, of course. There had been moments throughout her life when strange things had happened when she sang. A wilting flower had straightened and bloomed. A crying baby had fallen into peaceful sleep. A storm had gentled just enough for the fisherman to return safely to shore. But she had always dismissed these as coincidences, as wishful thinking, as anything other than what they truly were. "I am not ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know the songs. I do not have your skill." Lempi reached out and took Aino's hands in her own. Her grip was warm and strong, steadier than Aino had expected. "The songs are already within you," she said. "They've been there since before you were born, passed down through blood and breath and bone. What you lack is not ability, but faith. Faith in yourself. Faith in the power that lives inside you." She released Aino's hands and returned her attention to the kantele. "Now, listen carefully. I am going to teach you a rune. It is a simple one, a song of protection that every runolaulaja must know. When you sing it, you call upon the spirits of the land to shield you from harm. Will you try?" Aino nodded, though her throat felt tight with nervousness. She watched her grandmother's fingers begin to move across the strings, and then Lempi began to sing. The words were in the old tongue, the language of runes that was older than any written record, older perhaps than humanity itself. But somehow Aino understood them. The syllables wove together like threads in a tapestry, creating a picture in her mind of tall pines standing guard, of deep waters forming a barrier, of sacred fire burning away all darkness. It was beautiful and powerful and terrifying all at once. "Now you," Lempi said, her fingers still playing the melody, "sing with me." Aino opened her mouth, and the words came. They felt strange on her tongue at first, clumsy and uncertain, but as she continued, something shifted. The air in the cottage seemed to thicken, to vibrate with energy that she could feel against her skin like the pressure before a thunderstorm. The fire in the hearth blazed brighter. The dried herbs hanging from the rafters swayed though there was no breeze. "Yes," Lempi breathed, her eyes alight with joy. "Yes, little lark, just like that. You feel it, do you not? The power answering your call, Aino did feel it. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. She stopped singing, and the energy dissipated like smoke, leaving her gasping and trembling on her stool. "That was—" she started, but could not find the words to finish. "That was only the beginning," Lempi said gently. "There is so much more to learn, so many songs waiting to be sung." She set the kantele aside and cupped Aino's face in her weathered hands. "You will be a great runolaulaja someday, little lark. Greater even than me. I have seen it in my dreams." Before Aino could respond, a knock came at the cottage door. It was sharp and urgent, the knock of someone who had run far and fast to deliver news that could not wait. Lempi rose to answer it, moving with surprising speed for someone of her years. Standing on the threshold was young Mikko, the blacksmith's son, a boy of perhaps 12 winters, with wide frightened eyes and snow dusting his hair. His breath came in great ragged gasps, and he bent double with his hands on his knees, trying to recover from his run. "What is it, child?" Lempi asked, her voice calm but concerned. "What has happened?" "The mist," Mikko gasped out between breaths. "In the forest, it came from nowhere, black as night and cold as death. It is spreading toward the village. Father sent me to fetch you. He says only a runolaulaja can stop it." Lempi's expression grew grave. She turned to look at Aino, and in that look was a mixture of love and fear, and something that might have been farewell. "Stay here," she said. "No matter what happens, stay here." "But grandmother," Aino started. "Promise me," Lempi said firmly. She reached for her cloak, a thick wool garment dyed the deep blue of twilight, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not leave this cottage until I return." Aino wanted to argue, wanted to insist on coming along, but the steel in her grandmother's eyes brooked no opposition. She nodded reluctantly, and Lempi swept out into the morning, young Mikko stumbling along behind her. From the window, Aino watched them go. She could see it now, the darkness that Mikko had described. It rose above the tree line to the north like smoke from a great fire, but it was blacker than any smoke she had ever seen, blacker than the space between stars. It rolled and churned, and even from this distance she could feel the wrongness of it. This was not natural. This was not of this world. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain, and watched her grandmother walk toward the darkness with the confidence of someone who had faced such things before. The villagers had gathered at the edge of the forest, a huddled mass of frightened faces, but they parted to let Lempi through. Even from here, Aino could see them bow their heads in respect and relief. The runolaulaja had come. Everything would be all right. Lempi raised her arms to the sky, and even without the kantele, Aino knew she had begun to sing. The rune of protection, the same one she had just taught Aino, but stronger now, fuller, carrying the weight of 5 decades of practice and belief. Aino could not hear the words from this distance, but she felt them resonating in her bones like the tolling of a great bell. The darkness hesitated. It swirled and raged against an invisible barrier, and for a moment Aino dared to hope. Her grandmother's voice was powerful, her will unshakable. Surely she would triumph as she always had. But then something changed. The darkness lunged forward like a striking serpent, and from its heart came a sound that Aino would never forget. A sound like screaming and laughing and weeping all at once, a sound of ancient malice given voice. It struck her grandmother like a physical blow, and Lempi staggered, her arms falling to her sides. No, Aino whispered. She saw her grandmother try to continue the song, saw her lips moving though no sound emerged. But something was wrong, terribly, horribly wrong. A light seemed to pour from Lempi's throat, a golden radiance that should have stayed within her, but was being pulled away, drawn into the darkness like water down a drain. No! Aino screamed. She was at the door before she knew she had moved, tearing it open and running through the snow in nothing but her indoor clothes. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but she did not feel it. She could only see her grandmother, her beloved grandmother, collapsing to the ground as the last of that golden light was torn from her body and swallowed by the darkness. The mist retreated as suddenly as it had come, rolling back into the forest and disappearing among the trees as if it had never been. But the damage was done. Lempi lay motionless in the snow, surrounded by the horrified villagers, and when Aino reached her and gathered her into her arms, she saw that her grandmother's lips were moving, but no sound came out. None at all. "Grandmother," Aino sobbed, cradling the frail body against her chest. "Grandmother, speak to me." "Please." But Lempi could not speak. She could not hum. She could not sing. When she opened her mouth, there was only silence, a terrible emptiness where her voice had been. Her voice was taken, old Antero said, pushing through the crowd of villagers. He was the village shaman, a man of 90 winters, who walked with a staff carved from sacred rowan wood. His face was grave as he knelt beside Aino and Lempi. "Taken to Tuonela, the realm of the dead. I have seen this before long ago, in the time of my grandfather." "It is a claiming," Aino repeated, not understanding. "What does that mean? Who would do such a thing?" Antero did not answer immediately. He helped Aino lift her grandmother, and together they carried her back to the cottage, the villagers parting before them in stunned silence. Only when Lempi was settled in her bed, covered with furs and blankets, did the old shaman speak again. "There is much you do not know, child," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets long kept. "Much that your grandmother hoped you would never need to learn." He looked at Lempi, whose eyes were closed now in a sleep that might have been peaceful if not for the terrible stillness of her throat. But the time for secrets has passed. If you wish to save her, if you wish to save this village, you must know the truth. And so, as the fire crackled and the wind moaned outside the cottage walls, old Antero began to speak of debts and covenants, of the realm of the dead and the god who ruled there, and of a journey that only the bravest or the most foolish would ever dare to undertake. But that, my dear friends, is a tale for the next chapter. For now, rest easy and know that even in the darkest moments hope remains. Sleep well and dream of northern lights dancing across the sky like spirits at play. The fire had burned low by the time old Antero finished speaking. The cottage was filled with shadows now, and the only light came from the dying embers and a single tallow candle that Aino had lit when the darkness grew too thick. She sat on the stool beside her grandmother's bed, holding Lempi's hand in her own, trying to process everything the shaman had told her. It began long ago, Antero had said, his ancient voice rough as bark. In the time before the villages, before the farms, when our people still wandered the great forests following the reindeer herds. In those days, the boundary between our world and the spirit world was thin as morning mist, and those with the gift could walk between them as easily as stepping from one room to another. He had told her of the first runolaulaja, the original singers who had learned their craft from the spirits themselves. They had made covenants with the powers of each realm, agreements that allowed them to draw upon the magic of creation in exchange for certain obligations. The singers served the spirits, and the spirits empowered the singers. It was a sacred balance that had held for countless generations. But Antero had also spoken of a broken promise. Long ago, perhaps 200 years past, a runolaulaja of Aino's own bloodline had made a bargain with Tuoni, the lord of the dead. This ancestor had desperately needed something, some power or knowledge that only Tuoni could provide, and in exchange had promised something precious. Antero did not know the details. Such things were kept secret even from shamans. But the promise had never been fulfilled, and in the way of the spirit world the debt had passed from mother to daughter, growing heavier with each generation. Now at last Tuoni had come to collect. Grandmother's voice, Aino whispered, looking at Lempi's peaceful, silent face. That is what he took. The debt was her voice. Antero nodded slowly. The voice of a runolaulaja is her most precious possession. It is the vessel through which all her power flows. Without it she is merely mortal. He paused, his rheumy eyes studying Aino with uncomfortable intensity. But there is more. Without a runolaulaja to sing the protective runes, our village lies vulnerable. Winter is coming, and with it the dark spirits that prowl the longest nights. Without protection, the village will fall to the eternal cold. Aino felt her throat tighten. "What can I do?" she asked. "There must be something." "There is," Antero said. "You could journey to Tuonela yourself and retrieve what was taken." The words hung in the air between them, heavy as stones. Journey to Tuonela, the realm of the dead, the place from which no living person was meant to return. Is such a thing even possible? Aino asked. Possible, yes. Easy, no. Antero leaned heavily on his rowan staff, and for a moment he looked every one of his 90 years. In the old stories, heroes sometimes ventured to Tuonela and returned, but they did not do so unprepared. They carried tokens of power from other spirits, protections against the pull of death. Without such things you would be claimed the moment you set foot in that grey land. What tokens? Aino asked. Where would I find them? 3 things you would need. Antero held up a gnarled finger. First, a feather from Ilmatar, the spirit of the sky. It would allow you to breathe in any realm, even where the air itself is death. A second finger joined the first. Second, a scale from Ati, the god of waters. It would protect you from the black river that surrounds Tuonela and drowns all who touch it unprepared. A third finger rose. Third, an ember from the forge of Ilmarinen, the eternal smith. It would light your way through the darkness of the dead lands where no natural light can survive. 3 tokens from 3 different realms, Aino said, her mind reeling. And how am I supposed to obtain such things? I am no hero. I am not even a proper runolaulaja. I sang 1 rune this morning badly, and that is the extent of my training. Antero smiled then, a thin expression that held more sadness than humor. You are more than you know, child. The blood of singers runs strong in you. I have watched you grow these 20 years, and I have seen the signs. When you were 12, you hummed while helping the midwife, and the difficult birth became easy. When you were 16, you sang to calm a frightened horse, and it followed you like a loyal dog for the rest of its days. Last spring, you were heard singing in the fields, and the crops that grew there were the finest in memory. Aino remembered these incidents, though she had always dismissed them as coincidence. Hearing them recounted now, she felt something stir in her chest. Not quite belief, but something close to it. Your grandmother knew, Antero continued. She has been preparing you, even if you did not realize it. Every song she sang in your presence, every story she told, every lesson about herbs and spirits and the old ways, all of it was preparation for this moment. He reached into his robes and withdrew something that made Aino's breath catch. It was the kantele, her grandmother's sacred instrument. The birchwood gleamed in the candlelight, and the strings hummed softly as if recognizing her presence. She asked me to give this to you, Antero said, holding it out. Before the darkness took her voice, in that last moment when she knew what was coming, she pressed it into my hands and said your name. This is your inheritance, Aino. The kandeli and everything it represents. Aino took the instrument with trembling hands. It was lighter than she expected and warmer, as if it held its own inner fire. When her fingers brushed the strings, a chord rang out that seemed to resonate with her very heartbeat. I do not know if I can do this, she said honestly. None of us ever do, Antero replied, until we must. He stayed with her through the night, teaching her what he knew of the paths between worlds. He told her of the great fell in the north, where the sky realm could be reached, of the deep lake where Ahti held his court, of the volcanic lands to the east where Ilmarinen's forge was hidden. He drew maps in the ashes of the hearth and made her memorize landmarks and signs. By the time dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Aino had made her decision. She spent the morning preparing for her journey. She packed a leather satchel with provisions, hard bread, dried fish, a small wheel of cheese, a pouch of dried berries. She dressed in her warmest clothes, layer upon layer of wool and felt, with her thickest cloak over everything. She laced her sturdiest boots and wrapped her legs in strips of cloth for extra protection against the cold. The villagers came one by one to wish her well. First was the blacksmith, a huge man named Torvo, with arms like tree trunks, who pressed a small iron knife into her hands. "It's not much," he said gruffly, "but iron has power against spirits. Keep it close." Then came the miller's wife with a bundle of fresh bread still warm from the oven. The baker brought a pot of honey. The weaver gave her a scarf she had made herself, dyed the blue of summer sky. The fishermen pooled their coins to buy her a new water skin. Even the children brought gifts, small treasures they thought might help. A pretty stone, a lucky feather, a carved wooden figure of a bear. Aino accepted each gift with gratitude, her heart swelling at the kindness of these people she had known all her life. They were trusting her to save them, trusting a young woman who had never traveled more than a day's walk from her village, who had never faced anything more dangerous than a cranky goat. The last to come was young Miko, the blacksmith's son who had brought the warning the day before. He looked at her with wide, serious eyes and said something that would stay with her throughout her journey. "My grandmother used to say that courage is not the absence of fear," he said solemnly. "It is being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. I think you are very brave, Miss Aino." Aino knelt so she was at eye level with the boy. "Thank you, Miko. Will you do something for me while I am gone?" "Anything," he said eagerly. "Watch over my grandmother. Visit her every day. Talk to her even if she cannot answer. Read to her from the book of old stories on her shelf. She will hear you even if she cannot respond." "I will," Miko promised. "I swear it on my father's forge." Aino ruffled his hair and rose, blinking back unexpected tears. Before she left, she returned to the cottage one last time. Her grandmother lay exactly as she had the night before, her white hair spread across the pillow like a halo of snow. Her chest rose and fell with steady breath, but her eyes remained closed, and no sound escaped her lips. Aino sat on the edge of the bed and took Lempi's hand. "I am going now, grandmother," she said softly. "I am going to bring your voice back. I do not know if I can do it, but I am going to try with everything I have. You spent your whole life protecting this village, protecting me. Now it is my turn to protect you." She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Lempi's forehead. "Wait for me," she whispered. "I will return, I promise." Then she picked up her satchel, slung the kantele across her back, and walked out into the cold, bright morning. Old Antero was waiting at the edge of the village, leaning on his rowan staff. His breath misted in the frigid air, and his ancient face was solemn. "The path north begins there," he said, pointing toward a gap in the trees where a narrow trail wound into the forest. "Follow it for 3 days, and you will reach the great fell. From there, you must find your own way to the sky realm." He pressed something into her hand. It was a small pouch made of soft leather, and when she opened it, she found inside a handful of dried mushrooms spotted with red and white. "These are sacred," Antero said, "given only to those who walk between worlds. If you find yourself trapped between realms, unable to move forward or back, eat one. It will show you the path. But use them sparingly. There are only 7, and you may need them all before your journey ends." Aino tucked the pouch safely into her satchel and looked at the old shaman with something like affection. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You barely know me." Antero chuckled, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. "I have known you since the day you were born, child. I was there when your grandmother sang the blessing rune over your cradle. I have watched you grow into the woman you are today, and I know, as surely as I know my own name, that you are meant for this." He reached out and touched her cheek with one cold finger. "Go with the blessings of the ancestors, Aino. May the spirits of the land guide your steps and the stars light your way." Aino nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned toward the forest path, squared her shoulders, and began to walk. The village fell away behind her, the sounds of its daily life fading until there was only the crunch of snow beneath her boots and the whisper of wind through pine needles. The forest closed around her, tall trees pressing in on either side, their branches heavy with white. The path was narrow but clear, marked by blazes cut into the bark of trees at regular intervals. She walked for hours, falling into a steady rhythm that ate up the miles. The sun climbed to its highest point and began its descent, painting the snow in shades of gold and amber. Birds called in the distance, and once she saw a fox watching her from a snowbank, its orange fur bright against the white. As the light began to fade, Aino realized she would need to find shelter for the night. She was not foolish enough to travel in darkness, not in a forest she did not know, not with spirits potentially lurking behind every tree. She found what she was looking for just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. It was a small clearing with a natural overhang of rock that would protect her from wind and snow. Someone had camped here before. There was a ring of stones for a fire, and a pile of dry wood stacked against the rock face. Aino set about making camp with efficient movements. She cleared snow from beneath the overhang, laid down pine branches for insulation, and built a fire in the stone ring. The flames caught quickly, and soon she had a cheerful blaze that pushed back the encroaching darkness. She ate a simple meal of bread and cheese, washing it down with water from her skin. The food was plain but filling, and the fire was warm, and for a moment she could almost pretend she was on an ordinary journey, a pleasant adventure rather than a desperate quest. But then she looked up at the sky and saw the northern lights beginning their nightly dance, great curtains of green and blue rippling across the darkness, and she remembered why she was here. She took out the kantele and settled it in her lap. The strings gleamed in the firelight, and when she touched them they sang with a voice that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. I do not know what I am doing," she said, aloud to no one in particular. "I do not know the songs I need. I do not know if I have the power to do what must be done." She plucked a string, and a single note rang out clear and pure. "But I am going to try." She began to play, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. The tune that emerged was one her grandmother had often played, a simple melody about the coming of spring after a long winter. Aino hummed along, and then, almost without meaning to, she began to sing. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, words she did not consciously know, but that felt as familiar as her own heartbeat. They spoke of hope and renewal, of darkness giving way to light, of seeds sleeping beneath the snow waiting for the warmth that would call them forth. As she sang, something remarkable happened. The fire blazed brighter, though she had added no wood. The northern lights seemed to swirl and dance in time with her melody, and in the forest around her she sensed rather than saw other presences gathering, spirits of tree and stone and stream drawn by the power of her song. She was not afraid. The presences felt curious rather than threatening, like shy animals approaching a stranger who had proven themselves harmless. When she finished her song and let the last note fade into silence, she heard what might have been a sigh of approval whisper through the trees. "Thank you for listening," she said to the unseen audience, and then, because it seemed right, she added, "Will you watch over me tonight? Keep the dark things away while I sleep." A rustle in the branches overhead, a gentle breeze that felt like a caress, and then quiet, a peaceful quiet that wrapped around her like a blanket. Aino smiled, set aside the kantele, and lay down on her bed of pine branches. She pulled her cloak tight around her and closed her eyes. She dreamed of her grandmother singing, of northern lights dancing, of a voice that was somehow her own, and yet older than the mountains, telling her that she was on the right path. When she woke with the dawn, she felt stronger than she had the day before, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so, with the first light of morning painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, Aino packed her camp and continued her journey north. But that, dear friends, is where we shall pause for now. Rest well, and know that even the longest journey begins with a single step. Sweet dreams. The forest changed as Aino traveled deeper into the wilderness. The trees grew taller and older, their trunks so thick that 3 people holding hands could not have encircled them. The snow lay heavier here, undisturbed by human footsteps, and the silence was so complete that Aino could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had been walking for 2 days now, following the blaze trail that wound ever northward. The path had grown fainter as she progressed, the blazes older and more weathered, but she could still make them out if she looked carefully. Someone had walked this way before her, perhaps many someones over many years, and that thought gave her comfort. On the morning of the 3rd day, she encountered the bear. It happened suddenly. One moment she was trudging through a particularly deep snowdrift, focused on placing her feet carefully, and the next she looked up to find a massive brown shape blocking her path. The bear was huge, easily twice her height. if it had stood on its hind legs, with fur the color of autumn leaves and eyes that gleamed with intelligence far beyond that of an ordinary animal. Aino froze, her heart hammered against her ribs, and every instinct screamed at her to run. But she remembered her grandmother's teachings. Running from a bear was the worst thing you could do. And besides, there was something about this bear, something in the way it looked at her, patient and curious rather than aggressive. The bear made a sound, a low rumbling that might have been a growl, but somehow was not. Then, to Aino's astonishment, it lowered itself to the ground and revealed what it had been hiding beneath its massive body. Blood, dark and wet against the white snow, spreading from a wound in the bear's side. A hunter's spear had pierced its flank, the shaft broken off, but the head still embedded in the flesh. The bear was injured, perhaps dying, and it had shown itself to her deliberately. "Oh," Aino breathed, her fear transforming into compassion. "Oh, you poor creature, you need help." The bear huffed, a sound that somehow conveyed both agreement and impatience. Aino approached slowly, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. She knelt in the snow beside the great animal, close enough to feel the heat radiating from its body, close enough to see the pain in its amber eyes. The wound was bad. The spearhead had gone deep, and infection was already setting in. No ordinary remedy would save this creature. But Aino was not ordinary, was she? She was the granddaughter of a runolaulaja, and she carried her grandmother's kantele on her back. She did not consciously decide to sing. The song simply rose up from within her, as natural as breathing. It was a healing rune, one she had heard her grandmother sing many times over sick villages and injured animals. The words were in the old tongue, ancient syllables that spoke of knitting flesh and cleansing blood and driving out the darkness that lived in wounds. As she sang, her hands moved to the injury. She did not touch the spearhead, not yet, but she laid her palms on the fur surrounding the wound and felt the warmth of her own body mingling with the warmth of the bear. The power flowed through her like water through a riverbed, guided by the song, directed by her will. The bear shuddered but did not pull away. Its breathing deepened, steadied, and Aino saw the tension drain from its massive form. She reached for the spearhead. It should have been impossible to remove, buried as deeply as it was, but when she pulled it slid free as easily as a splinter from a fingertip. Fresh blood welled up, but only for a moment. The healing rune was doing its work. Even as she watched, the wound began to close, flesh knitting together in a process that should have taken weeks but was happening in moments. When the song ended, Aino sat back on her heels, exhausted but exhilarated. The bear rose to its feet, and she saw that where there had been a gaping wound, there was now only a pink scar barely visible beneath the fur. The bear turned to face her, and in that moment something extraordinary happened. The creature seemed to shimmer, its outline blurring like a reflection in disturbed water. When it solidified again, it was no longer merely a bear. It was something more, something ancient and powerful, a spirit wearing the shape of an animal like a man might wear a cloak. You have done me a great service, child of song. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonant as thunder, yet gentle as rain. It was not sound exactly, but meaning that formed directly in Aino's mind. I am Otso, lord of the forest, king of the honeypaws. I had thought to die here, struck down by a hunter's cowardice, but you have given me back my life. Aino bowed her head, not sure what else to do in the presence of such a being. I only did what my grandmother taught me, she said. Any runolaulaja would have done the same, perhaps. But it was you who walked this path today. It was you who chose to help rather than flee. Otso moved closer, and Aino felt the warmth of his presence like standing before a great fire. Why do you travel these wild lands alone, little singer? What quest drives you northward in such dangerous times? Aino told him everything. The words spilled out of her like water from a broken dam, all the fear and hope and desperation she had been carrying since that terrible morning when the darkness took her grandmother's voice. Otso listened without interrupting, his amber eyes thoughtful, and when she finished he was silent for a long moment. Tuonela, he said finally, the realm of the dead. It is not a place for the living, little singer. Many have tried to walk those grey paths. Few have returned. I know, Aino said, but I have to try. My grandmother gave everything to protect our village. I cannot abandon her now. Otso rumbled, a sound of approval. Loyalty is a virtue the spirits value highly. Very well. I cannot accompany you on your journey, for the Lord of the Forest has no power in the Sky Realm or the Water Kingdom or the lands of the dead, but I can set your feet on the right path. He turned and began walking northward, his massive form moving through the deep snow, as easily as Aino might walk through meadow grass. She followed, struggling to keep up, and found that, with Otso clearing the way, the going was much easier. They walked for hours, deeper into the wilderness than Aino had ever imagined going. The trees here were older than memory, their branches draped with lichen that hung like gray-green beards. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of snow and the occasional call of a raven in the distance. As they walked, Otso told her stories. He spoke of the time before humans, when the spirits roamed freely and the world was young. He spoke of the great heroes who had earned the favor of the forest through their courage and honor. He spoke of the balance between the mortal realm and the spirit world, and how that balance had been disturbed in recent years by those who forgot the old ways. Your grandmother remembered, he said. She kept the old songs alive, honored the old agreements. That is why the darkness targeted her. There are powers that wish to see the old ways forgotten entirely, and the runolaulaja are the greatest obstacle to that goal. What powers? Aino asked. Otso did not answer directly. Some questions are better left unasked, little singer. Focus on your task. Retrieve your grandmother's voice, and the answers you seek will reveal themselves in time. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they emerged from the forest onto a rocky slope that climbed upward into the clouds. Before them rose the great fell, a mountain of grey stone and white snow that seemed to pierce the very sky. "This is as far as I can guide you," Otso said. "The path to the sky realm begins at the summit. You must climb through the night and reach the peak by dawn. That is when the barrier between worlds is thinnest." Aino looked up at the mountain, her heart quailing at the thought of climbing such a height. "It is so tall," she said. "What if I cannot make it?" Otso nudged her gently with his great head. "You are stronger than you know, child of song. The power that healed my wound is only a fraction of what lives inside you. Trust in yourself, and the mountain will yield." He began to turn away, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "One more thing. When you reach the sky realm, do not try to deceive Ilmatar. She is the mother of all creation, and she sees through falsehood as easily as you see through clear water. Speak only truth in her presence, and she may grant you what you seek." "Thank you," Aino said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Otso huffed. "Thank me by succeeding, little singer. The forest grows cold without the warmth of the old songs. We are all counting on you, whether you know it or not." Then he was gone, vanishing into the trees as silently as a shadow, leaving Aino alone at the foot of the great mountain. She ate a quick meal from her dwindling supplies and drank deeply from her water skin. The climb ahead would be arduous, and she needed all her strength. When she was finished, she shouldered her pack, checked that the kantele was secure on her back, and began to climb. The lower slopes were not difficult. The rock was rough enough to provide good handholds, and patches of snow offered occasional relief from the relentless gray stone. But as she climbed higher, the air grew thin and cold, and the wind began to howl around her like a pack of hungry wolves. She climbed through the twilight, through the darkness, through the endless night. The stars wheeled overhead, brilliant points of light in a sky so black and clear that she felt she could reach up and touch them. The northern lights danced at the edge of her vision, green and blue and purple, painting the snow in otherworldly colors. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she sang. Not healing runes or protection runes, but simple songs her grandmother had taught her as a child. Songs about warm hearths and loving families, about spring flowers and summer sunshine. The songs gave her strength, reminded her why she was doing this, and she pressed on. The cold was bitter, so cold that her breath froze on her scarf, and her fingers grew numb inside her mittens. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Her grandmother was counting on her. The village was counting on her. Even the spirits of the forest, according to Otso, were counting on her. As the first grey light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Aino pulled herself over a final ridge and found herself standing on the summit of the great fell. The view was breathtaking. She could see for hundreds of miles in every direction, a vast expanse of forest and lake and mountain that stretched to the very edge of the world. The sun was rising, a ball of golden fire that set the snow ablaze with light, and the northern light still lingered in the western sky, fading but not yet gone. And there, directly ahead of her, something impossible. A bridge of light stretched from the summit into the sky, a shimmering pathway that seemed to be woven from the very fabric of the aurora borealis. It rose at a gentle angle, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into a bank of clouds that glowed with inner radiance. The path to the sky realm. Aino took a deep breath, feeling the cold air burn in her lungs. She thought of her grandmother, lying silent and voiceless in the cottage by the lake. She thought of old Antero and young Mikko and all the villagers who had given her gifts and wished her well. She thought of Otso, the bear spirit who had trusted her with knowledge and guidance. She could not fail them. She would not fail them. She unslung the kantele from her back and settled it in her arms. Her fingers found the strings and she began to play. The melody was one she had never heard before, and yet it flowed from her as naturally as water from a spring. It was a rune of ascension, she realized, a song that would carry her from the mortal world into the realm of spirits. As she played, she felt her feet leave the stone beneath her. She was walking on light, on music, on pure possibility. The bridge held her weight as surely as solid ground, and with each step the mortal world fell further behind. She did not look back. Otso had not warned her against it, but something deep inside told her that looking back would break the spell. So she kept her eyes forward, her fingers on the strings, her voice lifted in song, and she climbed the bridge of light toward whatever waited in the sky above. The clouds parted before her like curtains, and she stepped through into a world of wonder. But that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest now, and dream of bridges made of light, and mountains that touch the sky. Sweet dreams. Aino had imagined many things during her journey north. She had pictured the sky realm as a place of clouds and wind, perhaps a great hall floating among the stars, or a garden of celestial flowers blooming in eternal twilight. But nothing she had imagined came close to the reality that now surrounded her. The realm of Ilmatar was made of light, not merely lit by light, but actually constructed from it. The ground beneath her feet was solid but luminous, glowing with a soft radiance that shifted from gold to silver to rose as she watched. The sky, if it could be called a sky, was a dome of swirling colors that reminded her of the northern lights but was infinitely more complex. Patterns within patterns within patterns, each one more beautiful than the last. Structures rose around her, but they were unlike any buildings she had ever seen. They seemed to grow from the light itself. Towers and arches and bridges that curved and spiraled in ways that should have been impossible. Some were transparent as crystal, others opaque as pearl, and all of them sang with a soft harmonic hum that vibrated in her very bones. And the air was different here. It tasted of honey and starlight, and when she breathed it in, she felt energy flowing through her body like nothing she had ever experienced. The exhaustion of her climb vanished. The cold that had seeped into her bones melted away. She felt alive in a way she had never felt before, every sense heightened, every thought crystal clear. Welcome, child of the earth. The voice came from everywhere at once, and Aino turned in a slow circle, trying to locate its source. It was a woman's voice, ancient beyond measure, yet somehow ageless, carrying the weight of millennia, but also the freshness of a spring morning. Do not be afraid. You are expected." "Expected?" Aino said, her voice sounding small and strange in this place of wonders. "How could I be expected? I only decided to come here a few days ago." A gentle laugh rippled through the light. "Time flows differently in the realms of spirit. What is a few days to you may be an age to us, or the blink of an eye. I have known you were coming since before you were born, little singer, since before your grandmother was born, and her grandmother before her. From the luminous air, a figure began to coalesce. At first it was merely a suggestion of shape, a distortion in the patterns of light, but gradually it took form. A woman appeared before Aino, and the sight of her stole the breath from her lungs. Ilmatar was beautiful, but it was not a human beauty. She was too perfect, too radiant, too vast to be contained in mortal concepts of attractiveness. Her form was that of a woman, but her skin was the color of clouds at sunrise. Her hair was the dark blue of the sky just before dawn, and her eyes were the silver of stars reflected in still water. She was robed in garments that seemed to be woven from wind and moonlight, and when she moved, the very air around her sang. "I am Ilmatar," she said, her voice now coming from the figure before Aino rather than from everywhere at once. "Mother of waters, daughter of the air, she who drifted on the primordial sea before the world was born. And you are Aino, granddaughter of Lempi, descendant of the first singers." Aino bowed her head, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look after her days of travel and her climb up the mountain. "Great Mother," she said, using the title her grandmother had taught her, "I have come to ask for your help." "I know why you have come." Ilmatar's expression was kind but sad. "Your grandmother's voice was taken, and you seek to retrieve it from the realm of the dead. To do this, you need a feather from my wings to allow you to breathe, where the air itself is death." "Yes," Aino said. "Will you help me?" Ilmatar did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned and began to walk, her bare feet making no sound on the luminous ground. "Walk with me, little singer. There are things you must understand before I can answer your question." Aino followed, marveling at the wonders they passed. Gardens of flowers that seemed to be made of captured sunlight. Fountains that sprayed not water but liquid music, each drop a note that chimed as it fell. Trees whose leaves were tiny mirrors reflecting not Aino's face but images of other times and places, glimpses of moments both past and future. Long ago, Ilmatar began, when the world was young, and I was not yet as old as I am now. I floated alone on the primordial waters. There was nothing but sea and sky, and I drifted between them for eons, lonely beyond measure. She paused beside one of the mirror trees, and Aino saw in its leaves the image of a woman floating on endless water, her face turned up toward empty heavens. Then a bird came to me, a beautiful golden bird, and she asked if she could rest upon my knee. I agreed, for any company was welcome in my solitude. The images in the leaves shifted, showing a golden bird settling on the knee of the floating woman. The bird built a nest and laid 7 eggs. She warmed them with her body, and as she did, my knee grew hot, then burning. I twitched in pain, and the eggs fell into the sea. But they did not break. Instead, they transformed. From the lower halves of the eggs came the earth. From the upper halves came the sky. From the yolks came the sun. From the whites came the moon. And from the fragments came the stars. The leaves now showed the creation of the world, a spectacular vision of cosmic birth. Thus was the world made from my discomfort and the bird's eggs. I became the mother of creation, though I had not meant to be. And later, when I finally stepped upon the land I had inadvertently made, I gave birth to a son, the first of the great singers, the one who would teach humanity the runes of power. She turned to face Aino, and her silver eyes were deep with ancient memory. Your gift comes from my son, passed down through countless generations. The blood of creation runs in your veins, little singer. That is why I knew you were coming. That is why you were able to heal Otso with a song you had never been taught. The power is not something you learn. It is something you are. Aino felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the weight of what she was hearing. I did not know, she whispered. My grandmother never told me any of this. Your grandmother did not know the full truth. Even the wisest of the runolaulaja see only fragments of the whole. But you, Ilmatar, reached out and touched Aino's cheek with fingers that felt like cool mist. You have been chosen for something greater than any of your ancestors. The darkness that took your grandmother's voice is not merely a spirit collecting a debt. It is the beginning of something far more dangerous. What do you mean? Aino asked, fear coiling in her stomach. There are powers that wish to silence the old songs forever, Ilmatar said. Powers that have grown strong in the forgetting of humanity. Your grandmother's voice was not taken because of an ancient debt. It was taken because she was a threat to those powers. She was the last of the great runolaulaja, the last who knew the true songs of binding and banishing. With her silenced, they believed the threat was ended. Ilmatar smiled, and the expression held both warmth and something like grim satisfaction. They did not expect you. But I am not a great singer, Aino protested. I only learned my first rune the day my grandmother was attacked. I cannot possibly be a threat to anyone. You healed a lord of the forest with a song you had never been taught. You climbed the bridge of light to my realm, a feat that has not been accomplished in 300 years. You stand before me now, whole and unharmed, when lesser souls would have been scattered by the very air of this place. Ilmatar shook her head slowly. You do not yet know what you are, little singer, but you will learn. The journey to Tuonela will teach you. She raised her hand, and in her palm a feather appeared. It was white as fresh snow, long as Aino's forearm, and it glowed with a soft inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. This is what you came for, Ilmatar said. A feather from my wings. When you carry it, you will be able to breathe in any realm, even the grey lands of the dead, where the air is thick with forgetting. It will also mark you as one under my protection, which may prove useful when dealing with other spirits. Aino reached out to take the feather, but Ilmatar held it back. First a test, she said. Do not be alarmed. All who seek boons from the sky realm must prove themselves worthy. Your test is this. Sing for me the creation rune. The creation rune Aino's heart sank. I do not know it. My grandmother never taught it to me. Ilmatar smiled. I know she did not. That is why this is a test, little singer. The creation rune is not learned. It is remembered. It lives in the blood of all who carry the gift. Close your eyes, quiet your mind, and sing what rises from the depths of your being. Aino wanted to protest that this was impossible, that she could not sing a song she had never learned, that this was not fair. But Otso's words echoed in her memory. Do not try to deceive Ilmatar. She sees through falsehood as easily as you see through clear water. If she claimed she could not do this, Ilmatar would know whether it was truth or fear speaking. Aino closed her eyes and took a deep breath of the honey-scented air. She let her mind grow quiet, pushing away the doubts and fears that clamored for attention. She thought of her grandmother, of the way Lempi's voice had sounded when she sang, like all the music of the world distilled into a single perfect instrument. She thought of the power she had felt when healing Otso, the sense of something vast moving through her like a river through its bed, and she began to sing. The first notes were tentative, barely more than a hum, but as she continued, something caught hold of her. It was like falling, or like flying, or like both at once. Words came from her lips that she had never spoken, in a language she had never learned, and yet they felt as natural as her own name. She sang of nothingness, of the void before creation, of perfect silence and infinite potential. She sang of the first stirring, the first thought, the first impulse toward existence. She sang of the golden bird and the floating woman, of eggs that became worlds and pain that became beauty. She sang of earth rising from water, of sky stretching above, of sun and moon and stars taking their places in the great dance of existence. As she sang, the realm around her responded. The light intensified, swirling in patterns that matched her melody. The harmonic hum of the structures grew louder, joining her song in a chorus that seemed to span all of creation. She felt herself connected to everything, to the mountains and the lakes and the forest of her homeland, to the stars wheeling overhead, to the very fabric of reality itself. When the song ended, she opened her eyes to find tears streaming down her cheeks. Ilmatar was watching her with an expression of such tender pride that Aino felt her heart might break. "Well done," the Sky Mother whispered. "Well done indeed, little singer. You have passed the test." She placed the feather in Aino's trembling hands, and Aino felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of protection and blessing that wrapped around her like an embrace. "Keep this close," Ilmatar said. "It will serve you well in the trials to come. And know this, the creation rune you just sang is only the beginning. There are songs within you that have not been sung since the world was young. When the time comes, they will rise. Trust yourself, and they will guide you." "Thank you," Aino said, her voice choked with emotion. "For everything. Do not thank me yet." Ilmatar's expression grew serious. "The path ahead is long and dangerous. The underwater kingdom will test your courage. The forge of Ilmarinen will test your creativity. And Tuonela." She paused, and for the first time, Aino saw something like fear flicker in those ancient silver eyes. Tuonela will test everything you are. Be careful, little singer. The realm of the dead does not easily release what it claims." She gestured, and the luminous ground beneath Aino's feet began to glow brighter. "The way down is easier than the way up. Follow the light, and you will find yourself at the shores of the great lake where Ahti holds his court. Tell him Ilmatar sends her greetings and asks that he receive you as a guest." The light was intensifying, growing almost too bright to bear. Aino tucked the feather safely into her satchel and looked up at Ilmatar one last time. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Ilmatar smiled, and in that smile was all the warmth and sorrow of a mother watching her child go out into a dangerous world. "Perhaps," she said, "if you survive what is coming, if you succeed in your quest and restore the old songs to the world, then yes, little singer, you will see me again." The light enveloped Aino completely, and she felt herself falling through layers of radiance and color, through clouds that tasted of sweet rain and winds that smelled of distant flowers. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on soft grass beside a lake so vast that she could not see the far shore. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and copper, and in the distance she could hear the cry of loons calling to one another across the waves. The sky realm was gone, but the feather in her satchel was real and warm against her hip, proof that what she had experienced was not a dream. One token gained, two more to find, and beyond them, the realm of the dead waited, holding her grandmother's voice in its cold grey grasp. Aino sat up, brushed the grass from her clothes, and looked out at the great lake. Time to meet the god of waters, but that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest easy now, and dream of realms made of light and songs that create worlds. Sweet dreams. The great lake stretched before Aino like a mirror of hammered silver, so still and calm that she could see the first stars of evening reflected perfectly in its surface. The air here was different from the mountain wilderness, softer and warmer, carrying the scent of water lilies and fresh rain. Reeds grew thick along the shoreline, their feathery tops swaying in a gentle breeze that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Aino sat on the grassy bank for a long moment, catching her breath and trying to orient herself. The journey from Ilmatar's realm had been disorienting, a tumbling fall through light and color that had deposited her here without warning. She checked her satchel and was relieved to find everything still in place. Her dwindling food supplies, the small pouch of sacred mushrooms from Antero, the iron knife from the blacksmith, and most importantly, Ilmatar's feather, still glowing with soft radiance. One token gained, two more to find. She rose to her feet and walked to the water's edge. The lake was impossibly clear, and even in the fading light she could see far down into its depths. Fish swam in lazy schools, their scales catching the last rays of sunlight like scattered coins. Weeds of deep green and rich brown waved in underwater currents, and here and there she glimpsed structures that should not have existed, columns of carved stone, archways covered in barnacles. the suggestion of buildings far below, the underwater kingdom of Ahti. But how was she supposed to reach it? Ilmatar had said the feather would allow her to breathe in any realm, but the thought of simply walking into the water and hoping for the best seemed foolish at best and suicidal at worst. As if in answer to her unspoken question, a ripple disturbed the mirror-still surface of the lake. Then another, and another. Something was rising from the depths. Aino took an involuntary step backward as a figure emerged from the water. It was a woman, or something very like a woman, with skin the pale green of sea glass and hair that flowed around her like dark seaweed. Her eyes were the deep blue of ocean trenches, and when she smiled, her teeth were small and sharp as a pike's. "You are the one Ilmatar spoke of," the woman said, her voice carrying the music of rushing rivers and falling rain. "The little singer who seeks to walk in the realm of the dead." "I am Aino," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, "granddaughter of Lempi, the runolaulaja. And you are?" The woman rose further from the water, and Aino saw that below the waist her body transformed into something fish-like, a powerful tail covered in scales that shimmered with colors she had no names for. "I am Velamo, queen of the waters, wife to Ahti who rules these depths." The water spirit regarded Aino with an expression that was difficult to read. "My husband felt your arrival. The Sky Mother's blessing is not easily hidden from those who know how to look. He has sent me to fetch you." "Fetch me?" Aino asked nervously. "Is that good or bad?" Velamo laughed, a sound like bubbles rising through water. "That remains to be seen, little singer. My husband is unpredictable. He respects the Sky Mother, but he does not always grant her requests. You will have to convince him yourself that you are worthy of his aid." She extended a webbed hand toward Aino. "Come, the court awaits." Aino hesitated for only a moment. She had come too far to turn back now. She reached into her satchel and drew out Ilmatar's feather, holding it close to her heart as she had been instructed. Then she took Velamo's hand. The water spirit's grip was cool and strong, and before Aino could prepare herself, she was pulled forward into the lake. The water closed over her head, cold and dark and terrifying, and for one horrible moment she was certain she had made a fatal mistake. But then she took a breath, and air filled her lungs, sweet, clean air, as fresh as a spring morning, despite the fact that she was surrounded by water on all sides. The feather in her hand pulsed with warmth, and she understood. Ilmatar's gift was working. She could breathe here as easily as she had breathed on the mountain summit. The fear drained out of her, replaced by wonder. She opened her eyes and gasped at what she saw. The underwater kingdom was beautiful beyond description. Great columns of coral rose from the lake bed, carved with intricate designs that seemed to tell stories in a language of spirals and curves. Buildings of pearl and mother of pearl clustered around them, their windows glowing with soft bioluminescent light. Gardens of sea plants swayed in currents that Aino could not feel. their fronds reaching up toward the surface like supplicating hands. Fish of every color and size swam through the water streets, some alone, some in schools that moved with perfect synchronization. And the people. There were people here, or beings that resembled people. Some had the fishtails like Velamo, while others had legs but skin that shimmered with scales. Some had the features of eels or octopi, or creatures Aino could not name. All of them paused to stare as Velamo led her through the kingdom, their strange eyes following her with curiosity and suspicion. "They do not often see surface dwellers here," Velamo explained, noticing Aino's discomfort. "The last human to visit our realm was, well, it was a very long time ago." "What happened to them?" Aino asked, not entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Velamo smiled her sharp-toothed smile. "He displeased my husband. Ahti has a temper, you see. But do not worry, little singer. If you are truthful and respectful, you have nothing to fear." This was not as reassuring as Velamo probably intended it to be. They swam deeper, past neighborhoods and markets, and what appeared to be schools where young water spirits learned their craft. Aino saw a smith working with metals that glowed even underwater, a weaver creating cloth from what looked like solidified moonlight, a musician playing an instrument made of shells that produced sounds of heartbreaking beauty. Finally, they reached the palace. It rose from the lake bed like a dream made solid, a vast structure of crystal and pearl that glowed from within. Towers spiraled up towards the surface, their tips disappearing into the darkness above. Great doors of carved whalebone stood open, guarded by warriors in armor made of crab shells and shark teeth. Velamo led Aino through the doors and into a great hall that took her breath away. The ceiling was so high she could not see it. Lost in the blue darkness above, columns of living coral lined the walls, and between them hung tapestries woven from water itself, depicting scenes of storms and calm seas, of ships sailing and ships sinking, of creatures from the deepest trenches rising to the surface and returning to the depths. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single massive pearl, sat Ahti, god of waters. He was enormous. Even seated, he towered over everyone in the hall, a figure of such presence that Aino felt her knees weaken simply from being in his proximity. His skin was the deep blue-green of the ocean. His hair and beard were foam white and seemed to actually be made of foam, moving and shifting even in the still water of the throne room. His eyes were the color of storms, gray and silver and flashing, with lightning deep within. When he spoke, his voice was the roar of waves and the whisper of rain. "So, you are the little singer who walks between worlds." He leaned forward on his throne, studying her with those storm-colored eyes. "Ilmatar sends her greetings and asks that I receive you as a guest. Tell me, child, why should I grant this request?" Aino swallowed hard and stepped forward, still clutching the feather to her chest. "Great Ahti, lord of all waters," she began, her voice sounding small and thin in the vastness of the hall. "I come seeking your aid. My grandmother's voice has been stolen and taken to Tuonela. To retrieve it, I need 3 tokens of power, and one of those tokens is a scale from your tail. I humbly ask that you grant me this boon." Silence fell over the hall. The assembled water spirits seemed to hold their breath. Even Velamo, standing at Aino's side, went very still. Then Ahti laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of storms breaking ships apart, of floods washing away villages, of the remorseless power of water that does not care for the concerns of small creatures. "A scale from my tail," he repeated. "Do you know what you ask, little singer? My scales are not trinkets to be given away to any who ask. Each one contains a portion of my power. To give one to a mortal is to give them dominion over a piece of the waters themselves." "I understand," Aino said, though in truth she had not known this. "But I do not ask for dominion, great lord. I ask only for protection. The black river of Tuonela will destroy any living thing that touches it. Without your scale I cannot cross to the realm of the dead, and without crossing I cannot save my grandmother." Ahti stroked his foam-white beard, his storm eyes never leaving her face. "And why should I care about your grandmother? The waters do not concern themselves with the fate of surface dwellers. The rivers flow, the rain falls, the seas rage and calm, and what happens to humans is no business of mine." Aino felt despair welling up inside her. She had not expected the water god to be so cold, so indifferent to her plea. But then she remembered something Ilmatar had said, and an idea began to form. "Great Ahti," she said slowly, "you say the waters do not concern themselves with surface dwellers, but is that truly so?" She took a deep breath and continued. "The rivers carry our boats and feed our crops. The rain fills our wells and nourishes our forests. The lakes give us fish to eat and water to drink. The waters are not separate from humanity. They are woven into every part of our lives. And the runolaulaja, the singers like my grandmother, have always honored this connection. We sing runes of thanks when the fishing is good. We sing runes of respect when we cross rivers. We sing runes of gratitude when the rains come in season." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. "But if the old songs are silenced, if the runolaulaja are all destroyed, then who will sing those runes? Who will honor the waters? Who will teach the children to respect the rivers and the lakes and the seas? In a generation, perhaps two, humanity will forget. They will take what the waters give without thanks. They will poison the rivers with their waste and choke the lakes with their refuse. They will lose the old knowledge, and with it, the old respect." The hall had gone completely silent. Ahti was staring at her with an expression she could not read. "The darkness that took my grandmother's voice wants exactly that," Aino continued. "It wants humanity to forget the old ways. It wants the connections between our world and yours to be severed forever. If it succeeds, the waters will suffer along with everything else. Is that truly what you want, great lord? A world where no one remembers to honor you?" For a long moment nothing happened. Then slowly a smile spread across Ahti's face. It was not the cold, cruel smile she had feared, but something warmer, almost approving. "Well spoken, little singer," he said, his voice softer now, more like gentle rain than raging storm. "You have a clever tongue and a wise heart. Your grandmother taught you well." He rose from his throne and descended the steps toward her. Up close, he was even more massive, a mountain of blue-green power that could crush her without effort. But when he reached out one enormous hand, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "I will grant you what you ask," he said, "but not as a gift. Nothing of value is ever given for free. You must earn this scale, little singer." Aino's heart leaped. "How?" she asked. "What must I do?" Ahti gestured, and the water around them began to swirl. The throne room faded, replaced by a vision of the lake above, but transformed. Waves crashed against the shore. Rain fell in sheets so thick they turned the air to silver. Lightning flashed and thunder rolled across the water like the voice of an angry god. "A storm is coming," Ahti said. "The greatest storm this lake has seen in 100 years. It will rage for 3 days and 3 nights, and when it is done, many boats will be lost, many fishermen drowned, many villages flooded." Aino stared at the vision in horror. "But that is terrible!" she exclaimed. "All those people!" "Yes." Ahti's voice was calm, almost clinical. "The waters must rage sometimes. It is their nature. But perhaps the damage can be lessened." He looked at her with those storm-colored eyes. "Sing, little singer. Sing a rune of coming. If you can gentle this storm even a little, I will give you what you seek." The vision surrounded her now, the throne room completely gone. She stood in the heart of the tempest, wind howling around her, waves crashing, lightning striking so close she could feel the heat of it on her skin. It was terrifying, overwhelming, impossible. But she had to try. She reached for the kantele on her back and found it in her hands, dry and warm despite the water and rain. She placed her fingers on the strings and began to play. The rune of calming was one her grandmother had sung many times, usually for crying babies or frightened animals. But Aino had never attempted anything on this scale. She had never tried to calm a storm. The first notes were lost in the wind. The melody was torn apart by thunder. But she kept playing, kept singing, pouring everything she had into the rune. She thought of peaceful things, still lakes at dawn, gentle rain on summer afternoons, the soft lap of waves against a wooden dock. She wove these images into her song, offering them to the storm like gifts. And slowly, impossibly, the storm began to respond. The wind did not stop, but it softened. The waves did not still, but they grew less violent. The rain continued to fall, but it was gentler now, more like a blessing than an assault. The lightning still flashed, but it seemed further away, less threatening. She sang until her voice was hoarse, until her fingers ached, until the storm had gentled from a monster to merely a tempest. And when she finally stopped, gasping for breath, she found herself back in Ahti's throne room, surrounded by silent water spirits who stared at her with something like awe. Ahti was smiling. "Well done, little singer," he said. "You could not stop the storm, no mortal could, but you softened it. You saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. That is worthy of respect." He reached down, and with a wince that suggested the act was not painless, plucked a single scale from his tail. It was the size of Aino's palm, iridescent blue-green, and it pulsed with inner power. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It will protect you from the black river of Tuonela. But more than that, it marks you As one who has earned the favor of the waters, use it wisely." "Thank you," Aino whispered, overwhelmed by gratitude and exhaustion. Velamo appeared at her side and took her arm. "Come, little singer. You need rest before you continue your journey." The queen's voice was kind now, almost maternal. "We have guest chambers prepared." As Velamo led her away, Ahti called out one last time, "Little singer." Aino turned to look at him. "When you reach Tuonela, remember this. Water finds its way around all obstacles. It is patient and persistent. Be like water, and you will succeed." Aino nodded, tucked the scale safely into her satchel beside the feather, and allowed Velamo to lead her to rest. 2 tokens gained, 1 more to find. But that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest now, and dream of underwater kingdoms and storms gentled by song. Sweet dreams. Aino woke in a bed of woven seaweed that was somehow softer than any mattress she had ever known. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then the memories came flooding back. The underwater kingdom, the storm she had calmed, the scale from Ahti now safely tucked in her satchel. She sat up and looked around. The guest chamber Velamo had given her was beautiful in a strange, otherworldly way. The walls were made of living coral that glowed with soft pink light. The floor was covered in fine white sand, and the ceiling was a dome of crystal through which she could see fish swimming lazily overhead. A meal had been laid out for her on a low table of polished abalone. Strange fruit she did not recognize, bread that was somehow dry despite being underwater, and a cup of something sweet and golden that tasted like sunlight filtered through honey. She ate quickly, aware that time was passing, and her grandmother was still lying voiceless in their cottage back in Kalajoki. How long had she been gone now? 3 days? 4? Time seemed to flow differently in the spirit realms, and she had no way of knowing how much had passed in the mortal world. When she had finished eating, Velamo appeared at the doorway. "You are rested," the Water Queen observed. "Good. My husband has arranged for your departure. Come." Aino gathered her belongings and followed Velamo through the pearl-lined corridors of the palace. Water spirits stepped aside as they passed, some bowing slightly, others simply staring with their strange inhuman eyes. Word of her feat in calming the storm had apparently spread. They emerged from the palace into a current of warm water that caught Aino and lifted her gently upward. She rose through the blue depths, past schools of silverfish and forests of waving weeds until her head broke the surface of the lake and she gasped in the sweet morning air. The shore was different here than where she had entered. Instead of grassy banks and swaying reeds, she found herself looking at a landscape of rock and steam. Geysers shot plumes of white vapor into the sky at irregular intervals. Hot springs bubbled and churned their waters milky blue or vivid orange, depending on whatever minerals lay beneath. The ground itself seemed warm, and here and there cracks glowed with the dull red of molten rock far below. "The volcanic lands," Velamo said, her head emerging from the water beside Aino. "This is as far as I can guide you. The forge of Ilmarinen lies somewhere in those smoking hills. Follow the warmth and you will find it." "Thank you," Aino said. wading toward the shore. For everything. Velamo smiled her sharp-toothed smile. Thank my husband, I merely followed his commands. But little singer, a word of advice. She paused, and for a moment her strange blue eyes seemed almost gentle. Ilmarinen is not like Ahti or Ilmatar. He is mortal-born, a human who achieved immortality through his craft. He understands humans better than any other spirit, but that does not mean he will be easier to deal with. He has his own sorrows and his own grudges. Be careful. Before Aino could ask what she meant, Velamo slipped back beneath the surface and was gone. Aino stood on the rocky shore, water dripping from her clothes, and surveyed the landscape before her. It was harsh and forbidding, nothing like the forests and lakes she knew. The air smelled of sulphur and hot metal, and the constant rumble of geothermal activity made the ground tremble beneath her feet. But there was beauty here, too, if you knew how to look for it. The steam that rose from the hot springs caught the morning light and turned it into rainbows. The mineral deposits around the pools formed intricate patterns of color that no artist could replicate. And in the distance, rising above the smoking hills, she could see a peak that glowed with inner fire, a mountain that was more forge than geology. That was where she needed to go. She set off across the volcanic landscape, picking her way carefully between steaming vents and bubbling pools. The heat was intense, far worse than any summer day she had ever experienced, and soon she was drenched in sweat despite having just emerged from the lake. She stopped frequently to drink from her water skin, but even the water seemed warm and unsatisfying. As she walked, she became aware that she was not alone. Shapes moved in the steam, fleeting glimpses of forms that might have been human, or might have been something else entirely. She heard whispers in languages she did not understand, and once a laugh that echoed from everywhere at once before fading into silence. The spirits of the volcanic lands, she realized. Different from the forest spirits she had known all her life, different from the water spirits of Ahti's kingdom. These were creatures of fire and stone, as old as the mountains themselves, and they were watching her with interest. She kept her hand on the iron knife at her belt, remembering the blacksmith's words about iron having power against spirits. But she did not draw it. These beings had not threatened her, and she did not want to provoke them unnecessarily. The path grew steeper as she approached the glowing mountain. The ground here was black volcanic rock, sharp-edged and treacherous. More than once she slipped and caught herself on her hands, cutting her palms on the rough stone. But she pressed on, driven by the knowledge of what awaited her at the summit. She was perhaps halfway up the mountain when she heard the sound. It was a rhythmic pounding, metal on metal, so deep and powerful that she felt it in her chest as much as heard it with her ears. The sound of a hammer striking an anvil over and over in a beat as steady as a heartbeat. The forge of Ilmarinen. She followed the sound, climbing higher and higher until she reached a plateau near the summit. And there, set into the living rock of the mountain, was a doorway that blazed with light. Aino approached cautiously. The heat radiating from the doorway was almost unbearable, but the feather from Ilmatar pulsed against her chest, and she found that she could breathe despite the scorching air. She stepped through the doorway and into the forge. It was vast. That was her first impression, a sense of space so enormous that it should not have been able to fit inside the mountain. Great columns of black iron rose from a floor of polished obsidian to a ceiling lost in shadow and smoke. Channels of molten metal ran between workstations like rivers of liquid fire. Anvils of every size stood ready, their surfaces scarred by countless years of use. Tools hung from every wall, hammers and tongs and implements she had no names for, each one radiating the kind of power that came from being used to create wonders. And at the center of it all, standing before an anvil the size of a small house, was Ilmarinen. He was not what she had expected. The water god had been inhuman in his vastness. The Sky Mother had been inhuman in her beauty. But Ilmarinen looked like a man, a large man with massive arms and hands like shovels, but a man nonetheless. His skin was dark with soot and sweat. His beard was singed at the edges. His eyes, when he turned to look at her, were the color of heated iron, orange and red and yellow all at once. "So," he said, his voice the rumble of a furnace, "the little singer has come at last." He set down his hammer, an implement so huge that Aino doubted she could have lifted it with both hands, and walked toward her. Despite his human appearance, there was something in his gait that spoke of ages beyond counting, a weariness that no mortal could accumulate. "Great smith," Aino began, but Ilmarinen waved her to silence. "I know why you are here. Ilmatar spoke to me on the wind. Ahti sent word through the steam of the hot springs. He studied her with those molten eyes. You seek an ember from my forge to light your way through the darkness of Tuonela." "Yes," Aino said. "Will you give it to me?" Ilmarinen did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned and walked back to his anvil, where something lay half-finished on the metal surface. It was difficult to see clearly through the heat shimmer, but it appeared to be some kind of box or container covered in intricate designs. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Aino shook her head. "I am trying to forge a new Sampo." His voice was heavy with old grief. "Do you know what the Sampo was?" Aino did know. Her grandmother had told her the story many times. "The Sampo," she said slowly, "was a magical artifact you created long ago. It brought endless prosperity to whoever possessed it. Grain and salt and coins flowed from it without end. But it was lost, broken, scattered across the sea." "Lost because of human greed," Ilmarinen said bitterly. "I made it as a bride prize, hoping to win the love of a woman from the northern lands. But others wanted it too. Wars were fought over it. Men died by the thousands, and in the end it was destroyed. Its pieces sunk to the bottom of the sea where no one could have it." He picked up a piece of metal from the workbench, turned it over in his hands, and set it down again. "I have been trying to forge a new one ever since. Centuries of work, millennia. But every time I get close, something goes wrong. The magic will not hold. The pieces will not fit." He looked at Aino with something like despair. "I am the greatest smith who ever lived, and I cannot complete this work. Do you know how maddening that is?" Aino felt a stirring of compassion for this immortal being, trapped by his own obsession, unable to let go of a failure that had haunted him for ages. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "the Sampo was not meant to be recreated." Ilmarinen's eyes flashed dangerously. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you made it once and it brought nothing but sorrow. War and death and the breaking of nations. Perhaps the world is better off without such a thing. Perhaps your failure to recreate it is not a weakness but a mercy." The smith stared at her for a long moment, and Aino was suddenly very aware of how easily he could crush her, how helpless she was in this place of fire and metal. But then Ilmarinen laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he had not laughed in a very long time, but it was genuine. "You have courage, little Sanga," he said. "Or perhaps foolishness. It is difficult to tell the difference sometimes." He shook his head slowly. "I have spent so long trying to recapture past glory that I never stopped to wonder if I should." He looked at the half-finished Sampo on his anvil, then back at Aino. "Very well. I will give you what you seek. But first you must help me with something." "Anything," Aino said, though she knew she should be more careful with such promises. Ilmarinen gestured to his workbench where a jumble of metal pieces lay scattered. "I have been working on something new. Not a Sampo, but something different. A gift for the mortal world, something that will bring joy without the curse of endless wealth. But I cannot make it work. The pieces fit together. The metal is sound, but it lacks something essential." "What does it lack?" Aino asked. "Song," Ilmarinen said simply. "I am a smith, not a singer. I can shape metal and stone, but I cannot weave magic into my creations the way the old runolaulaja could." He picked up one of the metal pieces and held it out to her. It was a small thing, curved like a crescent moon covered in tiny holes. "This is meant to be an instrument. When the wind blows through it, it should sing. But I cannot make it sing. The magic will not catch." Aino took the piece from him and turned it over in her hands. It was beautifully made, every curve and hole placed with perfect precision. But Ilmarinen was right. It felt empty, like a shell without a creature living inside it. "What do you want it to sing?" she asked. Ilmarinen considered. "Hope," he said finally. "I want it to sing hope. When people hear it, I want them to feel that the world is not so dark as it sometimes seems, that spring will come after winter, that love will survive loss, that there is always something worth living for." Aino nodded slowly. She understood what he was asking. He wanted her to enchant the instrument, to weave a rune into its very substance that would activate whenever the wind touched it. She had never done anything like this before, but then she had done many things on this journey that she had never done before. She sat down cross-legged on the obsidian floor, the metal crescent cradled in her lap. She took out her grandmother's kantele and settled it against her body, and she began to play. The song she sang was not one she had learned. It rose up from somewhere deep inside her, a melody that spoke of all the small moments of beauty that make life worth living. The first flowers of spring pushing through the snow, a mother's embrace after a nightmare, the taste of fresh bread on a cold morning, a lover's whispered words in the darkness. a child's laughter echoing across a summer meadow. As she sang, she felt the power flowing through her, not violent or overwhelming like when she had calmed the storm, but gentle and steady, like a stream finding its way down a mountainside. The power flowed into the metal crescent, filling the emptiness, giving it voice. The instrument began to glow. Softly at first, then brighter, until it shone like a small moon in her hands. And when she finished her song and held it up to her lips to blow gently across its surface, it sang. The sound was indescribable. It was the voice of the wind itself, but shaped and refined, given purpose and meaning. It was hope made audible, joy given form. Ilmarinen stood frozen, tears streaming down his soot-stained cheeks as he listened. When the last notes faded, silence fell over the forge. Ilmarinen reached out with trembling hands and took the instrument from Aino. "In all my ages of work," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have never created anything so beautiful." He looked at her with new eyes, seeing not a young woman on a desperate quest, but something far more. "You have a gift beyond what any of us realize, little singer. The power in you is not just that of a runolaulaja. It is something older, something that has not been seen in the world for a very long time." He set the instrument carefully on his workbench and turned to his forge. With bare hands that should have been burned to ash, he reached into the heart of the fire and drew out a small object that blazed with contained fury. "An ember," he said, holding it out to her. "But not just any ember. This is a piece of the first fire, the flame that burned at the heart of the world before the sun was born. It will never go out, no matter what darkness surrounds it. It will light your way through Tuonela and beyond." Aino took the ember. It was warm in her palm, but it did not burn. It pulsed with light, and she felt its power thrumming against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered. Ilmarinen nodded gravely. "You have done me a service I did not know I needed, little singer. You have reminded me that creation is not about recapturing the past, but about making something new." He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Go now. Complete your quest. Save your grandmother and preserve the old songs. The world needs them more than it knows." He gestured, and a doorway opened in the wall of the forge, revealing a path that led down the mountain and into a forest of dark pines. "That path will take you to the border of Tuonela," Ilmarinen said. "But before you go, one piece of advice." He leaned close, and his molten eyes were serious. "In Tuonela, do not eat, do not drink, and do not look back. No matter what you see or hear, do not look back until you have left that realm entirely. Do you understand?" "I understand," Aino said. "Then go, and may all the powers of creation go with you." Aino stepped through the doorway and began the last leg of her journey. Behind her, the forge blazed with renewed purpose, and she could hear the sound of Ilmarinen's hammer ringing against his anvil, no longer trying to recreate the past, but forging something entirely new. 3 tokens gained. Now, at last, it was time to enter the realm of the dead. But that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest well and dream of forges that burn with the first fire and instruments that sing of hope. Sweet dreams. The forest Aino walked through was unlike any she had ever seen. The trees here were black, their bark as dark as charcoal, their branches bare of leaves despite the season. No birds sang in their twisted limbs, no animals rustled in the undergrowth. The only sound was the crunch of dead leaves beneath her feet and the whisper of a wind that seemed to blow from nowhere. This was the borderland, the threshold between the living world and Tuonela. With each step, Aino felt the warmth draining from the air, the light dimming, the very essence of life fading around her. The ember from Ilmarinen's forge pulsed steadily in her satchel, a heartbeat of fire in this place of growing cold. She walked for what felt like hours, though time had become meaningless here. The sky overhead was neither day nor night, but a perpetual grey twilight that offered no clues about the passage of hours. The path she followed grew narrower and more twisted, winding between trees that seemed to lean toward her, their branches reaching like grasping fingers. And then, without warning, the forest ended. Aino stood on the shore of a river unlike any she had seen. The water was black, not the black of night or shadow, but a complete absence of light, as if someone had carved a wound in the fabric of reality and filled it with nothingness. No ripples disturbed its surface. No current moved through its depths. It simply lay there, still and silent and utterly terrifying. The black river of Tuonela, the boundary between the living and the dead. On the far shore, barely visible through a mist that rose from the water like breath, she could see the outlines of buildings, structures of grey stone that seemed to have grown from the earth rather than been built, the realm of the dead waiting for her. But first she had to cross the river. She reached into her satchel and drew out the scale from Ahti. It gleamed in her hand, iridescent even in this colourless place, pulsing with the power of the water god. She held it close, took a deep breath, and stepped into the river. The cold was indescribable. It was not merely the absence of warmth, but an active, aggressive force that tried to tear the heat from her body, the life from her soul. She felt it pulling at her, trying to drag her down into depths that had no bottom, trying to dissolve her into the nothingness that was the river's true nature. But the scale protected her. A shell of warmth surrounded her, keeping the river's cold at bay. She could feel Ahti's power wrapping around her like armor, and she pressed forward step by step deeper into the black water. The river was not deep, perhaps only up to her waist at its deepest point, but crossing it felt like crossing an ocean. Each step was a battle. Each moment was a struggle against the pull of death that called to her from the depths. Halfway across, she heard a sound, a voice calling from somewhere in the mist. Aino. The voice was familiar, heartbreakingly familiar. Aino, my little lark. Grandmother? She whispered, her heart lurching. Come to me, child. The voice was behind her, coming from the shore she had left. Come back to me. You do not need to go further. Rest here with me. Rest. Aino's feet stopped moving. Every fiber of her being wanted to turn around, to run back to that voice, to find her grandmother and hold her and never let go. But she remembered Ilmarinen's warning. Do not look back. No matter what you see or hear, do not look back. The voice was a trick, a test. or perhaps something worse, a lure designed to trap her in the river forever. "I am sorry, grandmother," she said, her voice breaking, "but I have to keep going. I have to save you." She forced herself to move, one step, then another, pushing through the black water that tried to hold her back. The voice called again, more urgently now, but she did not listen. She focused on the far shore, on the gray buildings slowly becoming clearer through the mist, on the mission that had brought her here. And then her feet touched solid ground. She scrambled up the bank, gasping, trembling, her clothes soaked with water that was not quite water. Behind her, the river lay silent and still, revealing nothing of the voice that had called from its depths. She did not look back. The shore of Tuonela was made of gray sand, fine as ash and cold as ice. Nothing grew here, nothing moved. The air itself seemed dead, heavy, and still, carrying no scent except a faint mustiness that reminded her of ancient tombs. She stood for a moment, catching her breath, orienting herself. The buildings she had seen from across the river were clearer now, a collection of structures that ranged from small hovels to great halls, all made from the same grey stone that seemed to be the only material that existed in this place. "Welcome, traveller." Aino spun around, her hand going to the iron knife at her belt. A figure stood before her. It was a woman, or had been a woman once, tall and slender, with features that might have been beautiful if they had held any colour. Her skin was grey, her hair was grey, her eyes were grey, even her simple dress was grey, blending into the landscape around her until she was almost invisible. "I am Tuonela," the woman said, "daughter of Tuoni, keeper of the ferry. Though you seem to have found your own way across the river, I had help," Aino said carefully, keeping her hand on her knife. "From Ahti, lord of the waters." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, crossed the grey woman's face. Ahti's scale. I thought I felt its power. She tilted her head, studying Aino with those colourless eyes. "You are mortal, living. What business do you have in the realm of the dead?" "I have come to retrieve something that was stolen," Aino said. "My grandmother's voice. It was taken by the darkness that serves your father." Tuonela was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, I know of this. The voice of the runolaulaja taken as payment for an ancient debt. It caused quite a stir when it arrived. Voices are not usually what comes to Tuonela." "Will you take me to your father?" Aino asked. "I wish to petition him for its return." "I could," Tuonela said, "but petitioning Tuoni is not a simple matter. He does not easily release what he claims. Many have come seeking to retrieve loved ones or lost treasures, and few have succeeded." "I have to try," Aino said. "I cannot go home without my grandmother's voice." The ferryman's daughter considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I will guide you to my father's court, but first you must pay the price of passage." "I thought the scale was my passage," Aino said, confused. "The scale brought you across the river," Tuonela replied. "But walking the paths of Tuonela requires a different toll." She extended one grey hand. "A song, mortal. Sing me a song that will ease the burden of my eternal duty, and I will guide you safely to the palace." Aino hesitated. She had sung many songs on this journey, runes of healing and protection and calming. But what song would ease the burden of a spirit condemned to ferry the dead for all eternity? She thought about what it must be like to exist in this grey realm day after day, year after year, century after century, with only the newly dead for company. The loneliness of it, the weight of it, the endless, unchanging sameness. And she knew what to sing. She took out her kantele and began to play. The music sounded strange in this dead place, too bright, too alive. But she pressed on, and when she opened her mouth to sing, the words that came were not a rune, but a simple lullaby, one her grandmother had sung to her as a child. It was a song about the beauty of the mortal world, about sunsets and sunrises, spring flowers and autumn leaves, the warmth of a fire on a winter night, and the cool of a stream on a summer day. It was about all the things that made life precious, all the small moments that the dead had left behind. As she sang, something extraordinary happened. Colour began to seep into Tuonela's grey form. Just a hint, the faintest blush of pink in her cheeks, the slightest gold in her hair, but it was there. And in her colourless eyes, Aino saw something that might have been tears. When the song ended, Tuonela stood in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was different now, softer, more human. "I had forgotten," she whispered. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be alive." She looked at Aino with something like wonder. "You have given me a gift, mortal, a memory of warmth in this cold place." She turned and began to walk toward the grey buildings, gesturing for Aino to follow. "Come, I will take you to my father now, and I will speak in your favor, though I cannot promise it will make a difference." They walked through the realm of the dead, and Aino saw the shades. They were everywhere, drifting between the buildings like smoke, translucent figures that barely seemed to exist. Some looked peaceful, their features calm, their movements slow and purposeful. Others seemed lost, wandering aimlessly, their faces twisted with confusion or grief. "Who are they?" Aino asked quietly. "The dead of all the ages," Tuonela replied. "Everyone who has ever lived and passed beyond. They dwell here in Tuonela, neither suffering nor rejoicing, simply existing." "It seems a sad way to spend eternity," Aino said. "Perhaps, but for most it is a relief. Life is full of pain and struggle. Death is rest." Tuonela glanced at her. "Not all fear Tuonela, mortal. Many welcome it when their time comes." Aino thought about this as they walked. She had always feared death, as most living things did. But seeing the peaceful faces of some of the shades, she wondered if perhaps death was not the enemy she had always imagined. They passed through what might have been a marketplace, though no goods were sold here, and through what might have been a temple, though no god was worshipped. Everything in Tuonela was a pale reflection of the living world, similar in form but utterly different in essence. Finally they reached the palace. It rose before them, a massive structure of dark stone that seemed to absorb what little light existed in this realm. Towers spiraled up into the grey sky, and great gates of iron stood open, guarded by figures in armor that might have been metal or might have been bone. "This is as far as I can guide you," Tuonela said, stopping at the gates. "Beyond lies my father's court. You must go alone from here." "Thank you," Aino said, "for everything." Tuonela nodded. "Remember what my father values: truth, honesty, the acceptance of mortality. Do not try to trick him or bargain with him as you might with the other spirits. He is death itself, and death cannot be cheated." She turned and walked away, fading into the gray mist until she was gone. Aino stood before the gates of Tuoni's palace, her heart pounding despite the cold that surrounded her. She checked her satchel one last time. Ilmatar's feather, Ahti's scale, Ilmarinen's ember. 3 tokens of power from 3 different realms. Would they be enough? There was only one way to find out. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked through the gates into the court of the Lord of the Dead. But that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest now, and dream of songs that bring color to gray places and memories that warm even the coldest hearts. Sweet dreams. The interior of Tuoni's palace was vast and cold, a cathedral of shadows built from stone so dark it seemed to drink in what little light existed. Great pillars rose into the darkness above, carved with images of the dead in their endless procession from life to whatever lay beyond. The floor was polished obsidian, so smooth that Aino could see her own reflection walking beneath her feet, a pale ghost of herself trapped in stone. Ilmarinen's ember pulsed in her satchel, casting a warm glow that pushed back the oppressive darkness. Without it, she realized, she would have been lost in moments, swallowed by a blackness so complete that even memory of light would have faded. She walked forward, following a path that seemed to form before her feet and dissolve behind her, as if the palace itself was guiding her toward her destination. On either side, she glimpsed vast halls filled with the shades of the dead, thousands upon thousands of them, sitting or standing or drifting in the eternal twilight of Tuonela. Some turned to watch her pass, their empty eyes flickering with something that might have been curiosity, but most paid her no attention at all. The path led her to a great door, twice her height and made of iron so old it had turned black with age. There were no handles, no knockers, no obvious way to open it. But as Aino approached, the door swung open silently, revealing what lay beyond. The throne room of Tuoni. It was smaller than she had expected, almost intimate compared to the vast hall she had passed through. The walls were hung with tapestries that depicted scenes of death and decay, but also of rebirth and renewal. The floor was covered with a carpet of grey moss that muffled her footsteps, and at the far end, on thrones carved from what might have been bone or might have been pale wood, sat the rulers of the dead. Tuoni was ancient in a way that defied description. He was not merely old, but primordial, a being who had existed since before death itself had meaning. His form was that of a tall, gaunt man wrapped in robes of deepest black, but his face was hidden in shadow, and when he moved, it was with the slow deliberation of something that had no need to hurry, because it had all of eternity. Beside him sat Tuonela, his queen, and she was his opposite in every way. Where he was shadow, she was pale light. Where he was gaunt, she was full-figured and maternal. Her face was visible, and it was beautiful in a sad, gentle way, the face of a mother who had watched countless children pass from life into her realm. It was Tuonela who spoke first. "Welcome, child of the living world," she said, and her voice was soft as falling snow. "You have come far, and endured much to stand before us. We are impressed." Aino bowed deeply, remembering everything she had been told about dealing with the rulers of the dead. "Great Lord and Lady of Tuonela," she said, "I thank you for receiving me. I have come to petition for the return of something precious that was taken from my grandmother." "We know why you have come." Tony's voice was like the closing of a tomb, deep and final and utterly without warmth. The voice of Lempi the runolaulaja. It was claimed as payment for a debt owed by her bloodline. A debt she did not incur, Aino said carefully. A debt that was passed down through generations from an ancestor she never knew. "That is the nature of debts in the spirit world," Tuoni replied. "They do not fade with time. They do not disappear with death. They accumulate and compound until they are paid, regardless of who bears the burden." Aino felt despair welling up inside her. She had expected resistance, but the finality in Tuoni's voice suggested there would be no negotiation, no appeal. But then Tuonela leaned forward, and her gentle eyes met Aino's. "You carry tokens of power," she observed. "A feather from Ilmatar, a scale from Ahti, an ember from Ilmarinen's forge. These spirits do not grant such gifts lightly. They must see something in you, something that made them believe you worthy of their aid." "They tested me," Aino said, "each one in their own way, and I passed their tests. And yet," Tuoni said, his shadowed face turning toward her, "none of their tests prepared you for this. The Sky Mother rules the air. The Water Lord rules the seas. The Eternal Smith rules fire and metal. But death is my domain, and in my domain I am supreme." He rose from his throne, and Aino saw that he was even taller than she had realized, a towering figure of darkness that seemed to fill the entire room. "You wish to retrieve your grandmother's voice," he continued. "Very well. I will give you a chance. But be warned. The test I offer is not one of strength or cleverness or magical power. It is a test of the heart, and many who have faced it have failed." "What must I do?" Aino asked, her voice steady despite the fear that coiled in her stomach. Tuoni gestured, and the wall behind his throne became transparent, revealing a vast hall beyond. It was filled with the dead, thousands of them, shades of every age and condition, from ancient warriors to newborn infants who had never drawn breath. They sat in silence, their gray faces turned toward the throne room, waiting. "You must sing," Tuoni said. "Sing a song that moves the dead. Not merely entertains them or distracts them, but truly moves them. Make them feel something they have not felt since they passed from the living world. If you can do this, the voice will be returned. If you fail," he paused, and even without seeing his face, Aino felt the weight of his gaze. "You will remain here forever, another shade among the countless dead." Aino's mouth went dry. She had sung many songs on her journey. She had calmed storms and healed wounds and enchanted instruments of hope. But this was different. The dead had no stakes in the world of the living. They had no hopes, no fears, no desires. They simply existed beyond the reach of mortal concerns. How could she move beings who had already experienced the ultimate ending? Tuonela rose from her throne and descended the steps towards Aino. Up close, she was even more beautiful, her pale skin luminous, her dark eyes filled with ancient compassion. "I will give you this advice," she said softly, so quietly that Aino doubted Tuoni could hear. "Do not try to remind them of what they have lost. That path leads only to despair. Instead, remind them of what they still have." "What they still have?" Aino repeated, confused. "They are dead. They have nothing." Tuonela smiled, and in that smile was a wisdom that spanned millennia. "Think carefully, child. Death ends life, but does it end everything? Is there nothing that survives the grave?" She returned to her throne, leaving Aino alone in the center of the room, facing the vast hall of the dead. Aino's mind raced. What survived death? Not the body, that was obvious. Not possessions or status or power. But what about memory? The dead remembered their lives. They remembered the people they had loved, the moments that had mattered, the experiences that had shaped them. Memory was the one thing death could not take, the one thread that connected the dead to the living world they had left behind. And there was something else, something that Tuonela's words had hinted at. Love. Love did not end with death. The dead still loved those they had left behind, just as the living still loved those who had passed. Love was the bridge between worlds, the connection that even Tuoni could not sever. Aino took out her grandmother's kantele and held it close to her heart. She thought of Lempi, lying voiceless in their cottage. She thought of all the years they had spent together, all the songs shared, all the lessons taught. She thought of the love that bound them, a love that transcended distance and danger and even death itself. And she began to sing, but that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest now and dream of love that survives the grave and memories that light the darkest places. Sweet dreams. The first notes from the kantele rang out clear and pure, cutting through the oppressive silence of Tuonela like sunlight through storm clouds. Aino felt the strings vibrate beneath her fingers, felt the ancient power of the instrument responding to her touch, and she let herself fall into the music. She did not sing a rune. Runes were for magic, for bending reality to the singer's will, and that was not what was needed here. Instead, she sang something far simpler and far more difficult. She sang of love. She began with her own memories, the small moments that had woven together to form the tapestry of her life with her grandmother. She sang of winter evenings by the fire, Lempi's voice rising and falling as she told the old stories, her weathered hands dancing in the firelight to illustrate the tales. She sang of summer mornings in the herb garden, the two of them working side by side, the air thick with the scent of lavender and rosemary and sage. She sang of the first time she had played the kantele, her small fingers clumsy on the strings, and how Lempi had guided her hands with infinite patience. She sang of the lullabies that had soothed her to sleep after nightmares, of the healing songs that had chased away fevers and fears, of the birthday songs that had made her feel like the most special girl in the world. As she sang, she became aware that the dead were listening. The vast hall that stretched beyond the throne room had fallen utterly silent, thousands of shades turning their grey faces toward the sound of her voice. She could not see their expressions clearly, but she felt their attention like a physical weight pressing against her from all sides. She sang of the day her parents had died, the fever that had taken them both in a single cruel week. She sang of the grief that had threatened to swallow her whole, a darkness so complete that she had not wanted to go on living. And she sang of her grandmother, who had held her through the endless nights of weeping, who had fed her when she could not eat and washed her when she could not move, who had simply been there, a rock of love in a sea of sorrow. Tears were flowing down Aino's cheeks now, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The song had taken on a life of its own, pouring from her heart through her voice and into the dead air of Tuonela. She sang of the way love persisted even when the person you loved was gone. She sang of her parents, dead these 13 years, yet still alive in her heart, still shaping who she was and who she would become. She sang of the connection that death could not sever, the thread of memory and emotion that stretched across the boundary between life and death. And as she sang, something extraordinary began to happen. Color appeared in Tuonela. It started as the faintest hint, a wash of warmth that spread from Aino like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The grey stone of the throne room took on a subtle rose hue. The black tapestries showed flickers of their original colours, deep blues and rich reds. Even the air itself seemed to lighten, the oppressive darkness retreating before the power of her song. The shades in the great hall were weeping. Aino could see them now, see their faces clearly for the first time. They were not the empty masks she had expected. They were people, each one an individual with their own story, their own loves, their own losses. And her song was reaching them, touching something deep inside that they had thought lost forever. She saw an old woman clutching her hands to her chest, her grey lips moving as if speaking the names of children she had left behind. She saw a young soldier, his armor battered and blood-stained, tears streaming down his face as he remembered the sweetheart who had promised to wait for him. She saw a mother cradling an infant, both of them shades, both of them still bound by the love that had connected them in life. The song changed, guided by some force greater than Aino herself. It was no longer just her story, her love for her grandmother. It had become something universal, a hymn to all the love that had ever existed, all the connections that had ever been forged between living hearts. She sang of first loves and last loves, of the love between parents and children, siblings and friends, strangers who met once and never forgot each other. She sang of the love that transcended boundaries of time and space and even death itself. She sang of the truth that Tuonela had hinted at, that love did not end with the grave, that it persisted in memory and longing and hope. The hall was ablaze with colour now. The shades were no longer grey, but glowing with the warmth of remembered life. Some were embracing each other, reconnecting with loved ones they had been separated from since arriving in Tuonela. Others simply stood with their faces turned toward Aino, drinking in her song like parched travellers at an oasis. And above it all, the northern lights appeared. It should have been impossible. Tuonela had no sky, no stars, no natural phenomena of any kind. But there they were, great curtains of green and blue and purple rippling across the ceiling of the great hall, dancing in time with Aino's melody, the aurora borealis, the bridge between worlds, the visible manifestation of the magic that connected all realms of existence. The song built to its climax, and Aino poured everything she had into it. All her love for her grandmother, all her grief for her parents, all her hope for the future, and gratitude for the past. She held nothing back, giving herself completely to the music, letting it consume her even as it filled the realm of the dead with light and color and warmth. And then, as the final note faded into silence, she opened her eyes. The throne room had been transformed. The grey stone walls were now a warm amber, the black tapestries vibrant with images of life and growth. Even Tuoni and Tuonetar had changed, the shadow lifting from the Lord of the Dead's face to reveal features that were stern but not unkind, the Queen's pale beauty now radiant with joy. In the great hall, the shades stood in silence, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of awe, of gratitude, of hearts that had remembered what it meant to feel. Tuoni rose from his throne and descended the steps toward Aino. She tensed, unsure what to expect. But when he reached her, he did something she never could have anticipated. He bowed. "In all my ages as lord of this realm," he said, his voice no longer cold but rich with emotion, "I have never witnessed anything like what you have done tonight. You did not merely move the dead, child. You reminded them that they were once alive, and that what they felt in life still matters, even here, even now." He straightened and looked at her with eyes that held the weight of eternity, but also now a spark of something like warmth. "The debt is paid," he declared, "not because the original obligation has been fulfilled, but because you have given my realm something far more valuable. You have given us hope." Tunita had descended to join her husband. In her hands she held a small object that glowed with golden light, a crystal vial filled with something that shimmered and pulsed like a living thing. "Your grandmother's voice," the Queen said, placing the vial in Aino's trembling hands. "It is unchanged, undiminished. When you return it to her, she will sing again, as she always did." Aino clutched the vial to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you both." "Do not thank us," Tuoni said. "You have earned this, singer, but I must warn you of something before you go." He leaned close, and his voice dropped to a murmur. "The darkness that took your grandmother's voice is not defeated. It is merely thwarted. It will try again, and when it does, it will be looking for you." "What is this darkness?" Aino asked. "Who or what is behind it?" Tuoni shook his head. "That is not for me to say. Some truths must be discovered, not given. But know this. The power you have shown tonight is greater than you realize. You are not merely a runolaulaja, I know. You are something more, something that has not existed in the world for a very long time. When the darkness comes for you, and it will come, remember what you learned here. Remember that love is stronger than death. Tuonela touched Aino's cheek with gentle fingers. Go now, child. Return to the living world and restore what was taken. But do not forget us here in Tuonela. Remember the dead and the love that still binds them to the living. I will, Aino promised. I will remember. Tuoni gestured, and a doorway appeared in the wall of the throne room, a portal of light that stood in stark contrast to the gentle warmth that now suffused the realm of the dead. That path will take you back to the mortal world, the Lord of the Dead said, but you must walk it quickly and without stopping. The living cannot remain in Tuonela for long without beginning to fade. And whatever you do, he repeated the warning she had heard before, do not look back. Not until you have crossed the threshold and returned fully to life. Aino nodded, tucked the vial safely into her satchel, and walked toward the doorway. She paused at the threshold and turned one last time to look at Tuoni and Tuonela. They stood together, the Lord and Lady of the Dead, and for the first time she saw them not as terrifying figures of endings, but as guardians of a necessary transition, keepers of the peace that came after life's struggles were done. Thank you, she said again. Then she stepped through the doorway and began the long walk home. But that, dear friends, is a story for the next chapter. Rest now and dream of songs that light the darkness and love that transcends all boundaries. Sweet dreams. The path from Tuonela was not like any road Aino had ever walked. It wound through a landscape that shifted and changed with every step, sometimes forest, sometimes lake, sometimes mountain, as if all the places she had traveled were compressed into a single endless journey. The light from Ilmarinen's ember guided her forward, a warm beacon in the swirling uncertainty, and behind her she heard voices. They started soft, barely more than whispers carried on a wind that should not have existed. But as she walked, they grew louder, more insistent, calling her name in tones of longing and love and desperate need. Aino, her mother's voice called, the voice she had not heard since she was 7 years old. Aino, my darling girl, turn around. Let me see your face one more time. Little one, her father's voice joined in, warm and safe, and everything she had lost. We have missed you so much. Just one glance, sweetheart, just one moment. Aino's steps faltered. Her heart ached with a pain that cut deeper than any wound. She had not realized how much she had missed them, how much she had buried the grief of their loss under years of daily life and growing up. To hear their voices again, even here, even knowing it might be a trick. Do not look back, Ilmarinen's warning echoed in her mind. Do not look back. She pressed forward, tears streaming down her face, her hands clenched so tight around the straps of her satchel that her knuckles turned white. The voices followed her, joined by others. Old Farmer Home, who had died when she was 10, and who had always given her apples from his orchard. the miller's son Eric, who had drowned in the lake the summer she turned 15, the boy she had secretly loved though she had never told him. Even voices she did not recognize, ancestors she had never known, all of them calling, all of them begging her to turn and look. "I cannot," she said aloud, her voice breaking. "I cannot look. I am sorry. I love you all, but I cannot." The voices wailed, a sound of such profound grief that Aino nearly broke. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. The landscape around her began to solidify. The shifting confusion gave way to familiar sights, pine trees laden with snow, frozen streams, the tracks of animals in white drifts. She was returning to the mortal world, step by step, leaving the realm of the dead behind. The voices faded. One by one they fell silent, until there was only the crunch of snow beneath her feet and the whisper of wind through branches. And then, suddenly, she stepped through an invisible barrier and felt the cold, sharp air of a Finnish winter fill her lungs. She was home. Aino fell to her knees in the snow, gasping, sobbing, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of being alive. The sky above was grey with clouds, but it was the grey of an ordinary winter day, not the grey of Tuonela. The trees around her were the familiar pines of her homeland, not the black, twisted things of the border forest. And somewhere nearby she heard a sound that made her heart leap with joy. A bird was singing. She stayed there for a long moment, kneeling in the snow, letting the reality of her return sink in. She had done it. She had traveled to the sky realm and the underwater kingdom and the forge of the eternal smith. She had crossed the black river of death and stood before the Lord and Lady of Tuonela. She had sung a song that moved the dead themselves to tears, and she had retrieved her grandmother's voice. She reached into her satchel and drew out the crystal vial. It glowed with warm golden light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat, like a breath, like the essence of life itself. Her grandmother's voice, whole and unchanged, waiting to be returned to its rightful owner. Aino rose to her feet and looked around, trying to orient herself. She recognized these woods. This was the forest near her village, perhaps half a day's walk from home. The spirits had been kind, depositing her close to where her journey had begun. She started walking, moving as fast as her exhausted legs would carry her. The sun rose higher as she traveled, burning off the clouds to reveal a sky of brilliant blue. The snow sparkled like scattered diamonds, and the air was so clean and cold that every breath felt like a blessing. She passed through the village outskirts as the sun reached its zenith. The first person to spot her was young Miko, the blacksmith's son, who had been gathering firewood at the edge of the forest. His eyes went wide, and his armload of wood clattered to the ground. "Miss Aino," he shouted. "Miss Aino is back." He turned and ran toward the village, screaming the news at the top of his lungs. By the time Aino reached the main square, a crowd had gathered. The blacksmith was there, and the baker, and the miller's wife, and old Antero leaning on his rowan staff. They stared at her as if seeing a ghost, and perhaps to them that was exactly what she was. "She returned," someone whispered. "By all the gods, she actually returned," Antero pushed through the crowd and gripped her shoulders with hands that trembled. The old shaman's rheumy eyes were bright with tears. "Child," he said, his voice cracking, "we had given up hope. You have been gone for nearly a month, we thought." Aino shook her head, too exhausted for long explanations. "My grandmother," she said, "is she still alive?" Antero nodded, barely. "She fades a little more each day, but she held on. Somehow she held on. Then take me to a—" Aino gripped the crystal vial tighter. "I have what she needs." The crowd parted before her as she hurried through the village, Antero and Miko and a dozen others following behind. The cottage looked just as she had left it, smoke rising from the chimney, herbs hanging in the window. But there was a feeling of waiting about it, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Aino pushed open the door and stepped inside. Her grandmother lay in the bed by the fire, exactly as Aino had left her. But the change in her was shocking. Lempi seemed to have aged decades in the weeks Aino had been gone. Her white hair was thin and lank, her skin was paper pale, and her breathing was shallow and labored. She looked less like a sleeping woman, and more like a shade already halfway to Tuonela. "Grandmother," Aino whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "Grandmother, I am here. I came back." Lempi's eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with age and illness, but when they focused on Aino's face, something sparked in their depths. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound emerged. The silence of her stolen voice was absolute. "I brought it back," Aino said, her voice thick with tears. "I brought your voice back, grandmother. Hold still. This may feel strange." She opened the crystal vial, and the golden light within intensified, swirling and dancing like a living thing. Aino held the vial to her grandmother's lips and tilted it gently. The light poured into Lempi's mouth, flowing down her throat like honey, like sunlight, like music made visible. The old woman's body arched, her hands clutching at the blankets, but there was no pain in her expression, only wonder, only joy, only the pure ecstasy of reunion. When the last drop of light had flowed from the vial, Aino set it aside and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Lempi lay still, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and even. Aino felt fear clawing at her heart. Had it worked? Had she come all this way, endured all those trials only to fail at the very end? And then Lempi opened her mouth and sang. It was just a single note, a pure tone that rang through the cottage like a bell. But it was her grandmother's voice, unmistakable, unchanged, as beautiful and powerful as it had ever been. "My little lark," Lempi whispered, her voice rough from disuse but growing stronger with every word. "My brave, beautiful little lark, you did it. You actually did it." Aino collapsed into her grandmother's arms, sobbing with relief and joy and the release of all the fear she had carried since this journey began. They held each other for a long time, two women reunited after a separation that had spanned the boundary between life and death. Eventually, Aino pulled back and looked at her grandmother's face. Color was returning to Lempi's cheeks. Her eyes were clear and bright. Even her hair seemed to have regained some of its former luster. The return of her voice had done more than restore her ability to sing. It had restored her life force, her vitality, her very essence. "You must tell me everything," Lempi said, her voice growing stronger by the moment. "Every step of your journey, every trial you faced, every wonder you witnessed, leave nothing out." And so, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cottage windows, and the fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth, Aino told her story. She told of Otso, the bear spirit, and the healing rune that saved his life. She told of Ilmatar's sky realm, and the creation song that had risen from her own blood. She told of Ahti's underwater kingdom, and the storm she had calmed with her voice. She told of Ilmarinen's forge and the instrument of hope she had helped create. She told of the Black River and Tuonela and the court of Tuoni himself. And she told of the song that had moved the dead, the hymn to love that had filled Tuonela with color and delight. When she finished, Lempi was weeping, but they were tears of pride, not sorrow. "I always knew you had the gift," the old woman said, "but I never imagined it was this strong. What you have done, my little lark, is something that has not been accomplished in 500 years. You have walked in all the realms of spirit and returned with the blessing of each. You are not merely a runolaulaja anymore." "What am I then?" Aino asked. Lempi smiled, and in that smile was the wisdom of generations of singers stretching back to the dawn of time. "You are a keeper of the old ways," she said, "a bridge between worlds, a singer whose voice can reach not just the living but the dead, and the spirits and perhaps even the gods themselves." She took Aino's hands in her own. "The darkness that attacked me will try again. Tuoni himself warned you of this. But now it will face not one runolaulaja, but two. And together, my little lark, we will keep the old songs alive for generations to come." The door of the cottage burst open, and villagers began streaming in. They had waited as long as they could, but the news that Lempi was restored could not be contained. They brought food and drink, flowers and gifts, and soon the small cottage was packed with celebrating people. Old Antero approached Aino, his weathered face split in a grin. "You have saved us all, child," he said. "Not just your grandmother, but the village, the old ways, perhaps the very fabric of connection between our world and the spirit realms." He bowed deeply. "I am honored to have known you." The celebration continued into the evening and through the night. Someone brought out a fiddle, and someone else produced a drum, and soon the cottage was filled with music and dancing. Lempi sang for the first time in weeks, her voice rising strong and clear, weaving protective runes into the very air of the village. And Aino sang with her, grandmother and granddaughter, their voices blending in harmonies that made the northern lights dance overhead. As the winter solstice approached, word spread of what Aino had accomplished. Singers and shamans from distant villages began to arrive, seeking to learn from the young woman who had walked in Tuonela and returned. Some came to study the old runes. Others came simply to hear her sing, to witness the power that had moved the dead themselves to tears. The winter passed, and spring arrived, painting the world in shades of green and gold. The ice melted from the great lake. Flowers bloomed in meadows that had been buried under snow. And Aino stood on the shore where her journey had begun, looking out at the water that sparkled in the morning sun. She thought about everything she had experienced, everything she had learned. She thought about Ilmatar in her realm of light, Ahti in his underwater kingdom, Ilmarinen in his forge of eternal fire. She thought about Tuoni and Tuonetar in their palace of the dead, and the shades who had remembered what it meant to feel. She thought about Otso, the bear spirit, and Tuonentiti, the ferryman's daughter, and all the other beings she had encountered on her quest. And she thought about the darkness that had started all of this, the force that had stolen her grandmother's voice and tried to silence the old songs forever. Tuoni had warned her that it would return. The threat was not ended, merely delayed. But Aino was not afraid. She had walked in the realms of spirits and returned stronger than before. She had discovered powers within herself that she had never imagined. She had learned that love was stronger than death, and that the old songs would endure as long as there were voices to sing them. Whatever came next, she would face it. Not alone, but with her grandmother at her side, with the village behind her, with the blessings of sky and water and fire to guide her way. She lifted her face to the sun and began to sing. The song rose into the morning air, carried by the wind across the lake and into the forest and up toward the sky. It was a song of gratitude and hope, of endings and beginnings, of the eternal cycle of life and death and rebirth that connected all things. And somewhere, in realms beyond mortal sight, the spirits listened and smiled. And that, my dear friends, is where we end our tale. Aino's adventures are far from over, for the darkness still lurks and new challenges await. But for now, she is home, her grandmother is healed, and the old songs ring out across the land of 1,000 lakes. Remember, no matter how dark the night may seem, spring always follows winter. Love endures beyond death, and there is magic in the world for those who know how to listen. Stay safe and sweet dreams.